Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. As always, I'm your host Simon, slightly getting over a cold. The Tragic Case of Andrea Yates, written by Emma and read by me, of course. The format of the show, if you're brand new here, never read this before, let's dive in. Those of you who have been following this channel or podcast for a while, and those of you who've recently discovered this channel and then binge-watched the entire back catalogue of episodes might already be more than aware that I have a daughter. Excuse me. And by the time this episode comes out, I'm going to have a newborn baby that's strapped to my chest or latched to my boob while I'm busy working on a new script. I love being a mum, but those first few weeks are hard. Oh my god, dude. I know, I got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And it's it seems like yesterday where it was a friend of mine's having he's just had a kid. The kid's a month old. And he's like, dude, I really thought she started sleeping well. It was 3 days in a row. And I'm like, we've turned the corner. I was like, mate, no, you haven't. You got a while yet, son. Back when my daughter was a newborn, I barely slept more than 3 or 4 hours a night. She would wake up every 3 hours to feed, and it would take me almost 2 hours to change her nappy, feed her, put her back to bed, and then pump enough milk for her next feed. By the time I crawled back into bed, I would have maybe gone to sleep for an hour before she woke me up again. And then there were the nights that she would just not go back to sleep, all caps, and I would glare at my sleeping husband while I paced around our room and rocked her and shushed her and tried my best to remain calm while she cried. Yeah, there's one memory, and it was one of many evenings or mornings, I suppose, where my daughter gets up at 3:30 and then she just wants to play for 3 hours. And it's just what's going on? And I'd listen to the radio. I'd put on BBC radio in the UK or whatever, just have some background noise or whatever. And then it was an hour behind me. So it's always it's 2:30 in the morning. Hope you're all having a wonderful evening. And it's no. Some nights cooking is just not on the cards, whether you're busy, tired, or just don't feel like dealing with dishes or loading the dishwasher. That is something I hate. Cook Unity's got you covered. It's a chef-powered meal service that delivers restaurant-quality meals made by real chefs directly to your door. And we're not talking about frozen mass-produced food here. These are fresh, thoughtfully crafted meals using high-quality ingredients like the classic butter chicken by Chef Gaurav Raj with tens of chicken in a rich, creamy sauce. Or if you're feeling something lighter, the pesto chicken bowl by Chef Andres Mendez. A perfect balance of protein, fresh veggies, and bold flavors. And for that ultimate comfort meal, you can't go wrong with chicken parmesan with spaghetti by Chef Dustin Taylor. Crispy, cheesy, very, very satisfying. And what's great is that Cook Unity is all about variety. They've got options for every diet, including keto, vegan, gluten-free. Plus, the menu rotates weekly, so you're never stuck eating the same thing. And the best part, no grocery shopping, no prep, no mess, just heat it up and enjoy. And here's a great deal for you. Get 50% off your first order. Just go to cookunity.com/criminalist50 or click the link in the description below and use my code criminalist50 to try it out. Thank you to Cook Unity for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. After 2 more hours of pacing like that, I'd be exhausted and frustrated and on the verge of crying, and that's when the intrusive thoughts would begin. It'll stop if I just throw her down on the bed or out of the window or shake her until she stops crying. Yeah, I mean, this is why we call them intrusive thoughts. It's shit you'd never do, but you're oh my god, we have dark human brains. Those were the nights that to order my husband to get his ass out of bed and take the baby away from me before I hurt her, and then I'd have to go sit in another room and calm down before I continued caring for my baby with the love and tenderness that she deserved. When my daughter was 6 weeks old, I suddenly developed a high fever just after dinner one night. By 10 p.m, I was shivering. We called my sister-in-law to come and babysit, and then my husband rushed me to the hospital. The nurses and doctors on call in the emergency room had no idea what was causing it, but I explained that we had a newborn at home and that I hadn't been getting much sleep and that it felt a lot like burnout. The young doctor didn't believe me since the symptoms didn't match the ones for occupational burnout, but they cooled me down and sent us home at around 5 a.m. the next morning with some paracetamol to manage the fever, and I spent the majority of that next week resting in bed, baby at my side, while my husband went to work. Yeah, I was the same way. I think I took 2 weeks off, which was, it's nice to be able to do. And then I worked at home part-time for 2 weeks. But then you just go back to life. And it's yo, I gotta kind of go to work from 9 to 5 or 8 till 6 if you're me. And just earn money and such things. And it's weird, but for the working parents, which can be either the dad or the mum these days, I mean, yeah, these days, couldn't, I was about to say, always could have been. It's not quite whistle boy. But yeah, life just goes not back to normal, but like you just go back to work and then your work's just like it was before. It's weird. Things got better after that. I learned to take afternoon naps while my daughter was sleeping and went to bed shortly after putting her down at 8 p.m. My parents came to visit for Christmas and helped look after her, and my husband would take our baby in the mornings so that I could get some more sleep. Our daughter started sleeping for longer periods at night by the time she was 8 weeks old, and I got better at asking my husband and in-laws for help when I needed it. But I still had it easy. I only had to care for one. My daughter wasn't colicky. She didn't have a medical condition that required her to be monitored 24/7. I'm not a single mum, and my husband was more than willing to give me a hand whenever I'd allow him to. My in-laws are also just a few minutes walk away, so whenever I needed a break, I could go to my mother-in-law's house and she'd happily keep my daughter company while I just sat back and relaxed and gave my exhausted mind and body a break. Yeah, I mean, I also feel that raising kids is quite challenging. It's quite difficult. And I'm also in a position where it's like, I have many, many advantages. It's just like, I'm in a stable relationship. My kids are not difficult. They don't really get sick very much. And it's just like, there are so many people in so much worse positions. Like single parenting. Good Lord, that would be so hard. Not all parents are that lucky. And sometimes they do things they regret, often with tragic consequences. But this isn't one of those cases. In this case, a series of unfortunate decisions and events led to the deaths of 5 children, highlighting the need for proper postpartum support for new mothers, and it changed the medical profession forever. Is this... I thought we'd covered this. There was or at least we talked about it somewhere, there was a case in the UK where it was like 2 or 3 of a woman's children died of like SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, like cot death, and they were like, well, statistically, the odds of this happening to one person 3 times are enormously slim. So you did something. And the woman went to prison and they later figured out like, oh no, it was just unlucky. She was just really unlucky. Or there was something to it. The 911 call. No, it's not, because this was a British case already and 911's the American emergency number. Australia? I don't know. Other countries? Anyone else have 911? We have 999 in the UK. Or in Europe, 112. On the morning of June the 20th, 2001, Andrea Yates made 2 phone calls. At 9:48 a.m., she called 911 and told the operator that they needed to send a police officer to her house. For several minutes, the operator tried to get Andrea to explain why she needed the police to come to her house, but Andrea only said that they had to come. Eventually, she told the operator that she was alone at the house, but that she had 5 children with her. So, thinking that it was a case of domestic violence, the operator notified the police and told them they had to do a welfare check on a house on Beachcomber Lane in Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas is incredibly landlocked, right? Why is it called Beachcomber Lane? Houston, Texas I've been to Houston, Texas. It's like in the middle of Texas. Wait, is Texas landlocked? I can't believe I don't know that. I think it is, right? A police officer named David Knapp responded and informed dispatch that he was 2 blocks away and would be performing the welfare check. At 9:56 a.m., Andrea Yates called her husband, Rusty Yates, at work and told him that he had to come home immediately before she hung up the phone. Rusty then called his mother, Dora Yates, who should have already been at the Yates family home, where she was trying to help look after both Andrea and the kids. Dora explained that she'd overslept and hadn't left the hotel yet, and Rusty told her to hurry and get to the house as soon as she could because he was sure that something was wrong. Rusty then called Andrea back and asked if she and the kids were okay. Quoting him, "I asked her, is anybody hurt? And she said yes. And I said, who? And she said, the kids. And I said, which ones? And she said, all of them." Oh my. I have the pins and needles on my body everywhere. Oh God. It was around this time that Officer David Knapp arrived at the single-story brick home on Beachcomber Lane. He got out of his patrol car and was busy approaching the house when a woman with dark, wet hair opened the front door, her face expressionless. Officer Knapp introduced himself and then asked the woman if she was the one who'd called 911. She said that she was, and when Officer Knapp asked her if everything was okay or if she needed any help, Andrea Yates calmly told him, "I just killed my kids." Holy shit. The perfect little family. In most of these episodes, we always start at the beginning so that you can get an idea of why the bad guy we're covering that day committed the horrible crimes they were convicted of. But in this case, we're starting at the beginning so that we can better understand why this tragedy never should have happened. Andrea Pia Kennedy was born on the 2nd of July 1964 in Houston, Texas, and was the youngest of 5 children. Her parents were both immigrants. Her father, Andrew, was originally from Ireland and had spent some time working for the British Royal Air Force as a navigator on a B-24 Liberator bomber. After the war ended, he spent some time in the British occupation zone in Germany, which is where he met and fell in love with a German interpreter called Jutta Kohler. The two of them were married, and they eventually emigrated to Texas, where Andrew found a job as a technician at the Ford Motor Company and later worked as a teacher. Andrew was Catholic, and Jutta had just converted to Catholicism before they were married, and all of their 5 children would be raised in the Catholic faith. Jutta would admit that they were pretty strict about going to Mass every Sunday and adhering to the rules and practices of their faith, and would later explain that it might be part of the reason why none of the children continued to practice Catholicism after they'd left the house. Andrea is described as having been studious and shy as a child and was very close to her father. The two of them shared a love of sailing, and on the weekends, father and daughter would spend their Saturday afternoons sailing on a nearby lake. Andrea was introverted and a people-pleaser, and Rusty would later explain that she never learned to be assertive and stand up for her wants and needs. She was also a bit of an overachiever. She was a competitive swimmer and later became captain of the swim team, was an officer in the National Honor Society, and was the class valedictorian when she graduated high school in 1982. It's all very impressive, isn't it? She then went on to study nursing and started working as a registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in 1986. Okay, excellent. Seems like everything's going rather well for her. Andrea only started dating when she was 23, but her Catholic upbringing soon became a hindrance. Andrea didn't drink alcohol and was adamant about abstaining from sex until marriage, and soon realized that those weren't things the average 25-year-old man wanted to hear. No, but there are other, Catholics, and there are other, very religious people. I feel like they all kind of move in the same circles, don't they? Because they all believe in these same, in my opinion, slightly absurd things. So after her boyfriend broke up with her because she refused to have sex with him, Andrea became more selective regarding the men she dated and prefaced any offer of meeting up for a date by explaining that she didn't drink and wasn't interested in sex before marriage, which severely limited her dating pool. Well, isn't there this is back in the day, I suppose. Now I'd be isn't there an app for that? Christian mingling or some such. I didn't realize the Catholics were so strict on no sex before marriage. In September 1989, the now 25-year-old Andrea was living in an apartment complex in Houston when she caught the attention of the 25-year-old Russell, or Rusty Yates. He was originally from Nashville in Tennessee, played football, and had obtained a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics at Auburn University. These both sound like pretty intelligent people, don't they? In 1989, he was already working for NASA as a computer expert. Scratch that. Very intelligent people. And he would later explain that the first time he saw Andrea, she'd been swimming on her own in the apartment complex's swimming pool. Swanky. His first thought was that she was a water nymph. He complimented her ability to float on her back without any effort, and then didn't see her again for 2 months. Then late one night, she knocked on his door. Andrea introduced herself and told him that someone had scratched her car and she wanted to know if he'd seen anything. He hadn't, but the two flirted and talked a while, and a few days later, Andrea invited him out for a coffee. Rusty would later explain that she never learned to be assertive. She sounds pretty fucking assertive. She just asked the dude out. Rusty didn't have a problem with Andrea's stance on alcohol and sex before marriage. After all, he had grown up in a Christian household. He'd been raised in the Methodist Church and had been the president of the Methodist Youth Group at Auburn University. His father had a drinking problem and passed away when Rusty was 15, so Rusty explained that he also wasn't much of a drinker. Well, great. See, I told you. You just got to find someone who's also, dry and not into sex. Boom! After they'd been dating for a month or so, Rusty introduced Andrea to his close friends, Michael and Rachel Warrenecki. The Warreneckis are religious fundamentalists, and more than a little culty. They are described as being fire and brimstone preachers, rejecting all forms of organized religion, believe that the Roman Catholic Church is a tool of Satan, and that the Mormon faith that is practiced in the US is not an acceptable way to raise family and children. I mean, these people sound annoying. I got no problem with religious people just being religious people. I just don't like this sort of religious person where they're, you're doing it wrong, our way is the only way, you should join us or you'll burn in hell. And it's steady on, no, you're not correct. My grandparents were evangelical Christians, and I am not a religious man. And they're the constant... Oh, and then Jesus said this. And it's oh my God, no one cares. Do you think that your family might not be religious because you're annoying? Back in the 1980s, they lived in a motorhome with their 6 children and traveled all over the US to preach their version of the gospel. Or whenever they arrived in a new city, they'd stop at the nearest college campus, hand out pamphlets to share their version of the gospel with the world, and Michael would get in onto his little soapbox and start yelling at the students that they were all sinners and were doomed to end up in hell one day. I told you, is what they do. It's so straight. Leave us alone. We don't believe in your silly little fictional place. According to attorney George Parnham, he would yell at female students that they were going to hell because they were studying and learning in a material world when they should be out there reproducing. What next? No driver's licenses. Women can vote now? Outrageous! They should be breeding! But only after they're married. Rusty had met Michael and Rachel during one of these preaching sessions while he was still at Auburn University, and he'd kept in contact with them by writing them letters and going to visit them whenever they were in town. Over the years, Rusty had come to see Michael as a kind of mentor and often asked his advice when making big life decisions, like when he'd just met the girl that he was planning on marrying someday. According to Michael Warrenetsky, he knew she was the one, and he was really impressed with her. She was a nurse, and he wanted us to meet her, real bad. Michael's first impression of Andrea was that she was shy and maybe a little intimidated by him and his wife. You sound scary and intimidating. And also if, your religiosity, is something that you attach to yourself quite firmly, and then you come across someone who's a more hardcore version of that and might be judging you for something that you hold quite dear, you're gonna be a little bit uncomfortable about that, in my opinion. I would be. But the 4 of them talked, and afterwards Michael pulled Rusty aside and told him not to marry Andrea, at least not yet. According to Michael, I cautioned Rusty not to get married, as I do most young people, for the simple reason that for myself, when I came to Christ, I realized I was not mature enough to be able to love a woman and take care of her needs as well as children. I needed to have some real character and some real wisdom and things that I knew I could only get from God. Rusty is not what I wanted to hear, dude. I want to get married. I want to get married real bad. As he did in most things in life, Rusty listened to Michael's advice and told Andrea he wasn't going to marry her anytime soon. But the 2 of them were in love, and eventually one thing led to another, and Andrea decided that maybe she wasn't quite so attracted to the idea of staying a virgin up to her wedding day. Jesus Christ, it's such an alien concept to me. I'd be like, this is troubling. After dating for just over 2 years, Rusty and Andrea moved in together, but the fact that they still weren't married bothered Andrea, and Rusty finally asked her to marry him in December 1992. They were married on the 17th of April 1993, and according to her family, Andrea had worn a veil but had refused to let it cover her face, since that would signal that she was a virginal bride when she was fully aware that she had become a fallen woman and was no longer pure when she married Rusty. The newlyweds then moved into a brand new 4-bedroom house in Friendswood, Texas. Before their wedding, they told all their friends and family that they liked the idea of having as many children as God would allow, and within 2 months of their marriage, Andrea became pregnant. Their firstborn, Noah, was born on the 26th of February 1994, and Andrea quit her job and became a stay-at-home mum so that she could devote all her time to her son. She was still in contact with Rachel Warrenetsky, and she urged the young mother not to use disposable nappies and to use cloth ones instead. Not because disposable nappies were bad for the environment, because Rachel believed that using cloth diapers helped women to disassociate from the material world and return to the basics. We had a couple of friends who had a kid at exactly the same time as us. It was I think there was a few days in between them. And they were like, yeah, we're going to, environmentally, we're going to use the washable cloth diapers. The next time we saw them, a few weeks later, it's how's that going? And they were like, no, we just use the disposables now. This was a complete nightmare. And it's yes, I feel bad about the thousands of diapers that I'm dumping into the waste, but hey-ho, needs must. She also encouraged Andrea to opt for natural childbirth without any pain medication, because the Warrenetskys believed that natural childbirth is a humbling experience for a woman. All right, this sounds very much like Andrea's decision. I remember my wife's second birth. It happened a lot quicker than the first one. And she was like, okay, can I have that epidural now? And they're like, no, too late. It's coming. And she's like, oh, for fuck's sake. Rusty and Andrea's second son, John, was born on the 15th of December 1995, and now Andrea had him and the almost 2-year-old Noah to look after. They kept her busy, and Andrea no longer had time to meet up with her old friends or to get out of the house, though she still went to her mother's house every week, where she made a point of spending some time with her father, who suffered from Alzheimer's. Every now and again, she'd go and visit her best friend, Debbie Holmes, but they were both young mums and with busy schedules, and they didn't see each other as often as they used to. Oh my god, preach. This speaks to me so much, this episode so far. It's just kind of I don't like these ones because it's like, we know what's happening and we know where this goes. And the more I relate to the people in the episode, the harder it always is. Except with Pedro Lopez, where it's like, I'm not a young boy growing up in like Bolivia or wherever. But that one still fucking hit because Pedro Lopez is a monster. Andrea also kept her mind occupied by learning new arts and crafts, and according to Rusty, Andrea often had several craft projects going on at once and would regularly encourage the kids to help her by drawing new designs or pictures. According to her mother-in-law, Andrea Yates, Andrea had always been very supportive of everyone, very giving, very comforting, friendly, but not really outgoing as such. She would always quietly go about helping people, and she was playful with the children. She was loving with them. She would hold them, rock them, put her arms around them. She was always there for them. But her family and friends would also point out that as time went on, Andrea became more withdrawn and would only talk about her kids and what they were up to. But sometime after their second child was born, Andrea had written a letter to Rachel Warrenetsky and told her that she often felt lonely and depressed. Rusty was always at work, and if he wasn't at work, he was out playing golf, leaving Andrea to look after the kids on her own. And even though she loved her children, she was exhausted and worn out, and it was taking a toll on her mental health. Yeah, I don't think my wife would be particularly pleased. She's always like, I'm quite glad you're not into sports, Simon. And I'm like, why? Because she's like, a lot of my girlfriends' husbands are into sports. And it's an excuse for them to go out for like an entire weekend day and like drink and watch sports because it's something they've always done. And she's like, you don't do that. It's like, no. And honestly, I don't like sports so much that even if it was an excuse to like get out of the house and have some alone time for a little while, I'd be like, I'd rather not. Thanks. Just can't do sports. But instead of advising Andrea to talk to her husband and let him know that she needed them to help with the kids, let me guess, Rachel just tells Andrea that you've got to pray the sadness away because that's going to work. Rachel wrote back and told Andrea to remember that it was her duty as a good Christian wife to serve her husbands. After all, the Warrenetskys liked to preach that God hadn't created Eve to be Adam's wife and equal, but instead, quote, a woman is created to be a helper. That does not mean a wife, it means a servant, single or married. Oh my God. What is this, the 1940s? What's going on? Rachel advised Andrea to open up her Bible and read Titus 2. Titus 2 sounds like a crappy Marvel movie. Captain America, Titus 2. A book in the New Testament that describes what God's church should look like. The elders should be sober, reverent, temperate, and sound in faith, love, and patience. And the older women should teach the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homeowners, good and obedient to their own husbands. All right. I mean, it's like looking at a self-help book from 2,000 years ago and being like, oh, filled with wisdom. Rachel also pointed out that Jesus knew that Andrea was a sinner, that he knew exactly just how wicked, weak, and vulnerable Andrea was, but that, quote, God is able to sympathize with your weakness. Even the loneliness works to draw you to seek and find security in him. All right, chill out, Bible basher. So Andrea hunkered down and did her best to be a good Christian wife and manage on her own. Around this time, Rusty was required to go to Florida for 6 months for work. Good Lord. He didn't want to leave Andrea and the kids behind, so he suggested that they should make a temporary move to Florida. Yeah, for 6 months? I definitely would. Wait, how far is Texas from Florida? It's not that far, is it? You could, fly home on the weekends, at least. He also told Andrea that it would provide him the opportunity to live out one of his dreams, to live like the Warrenetskys did, unrestrained by mortgages and electricity bills and the expectations of society. Sometimes, though, living by the expectations of society is a good thing because it makes you not weird. And not like, oh, it's good to be weird. Mostly it's not. Mostly it's kind of better to fit in. You'll have your life will be much more comfortable if you fit in. And because Andrea wanted to please her husband, she agreed to pack up their things while Rusty rented out the house for $1,000 a month. Rusty bought wasn't it like a 5-bedroom house? Holy shit, the 90s. Rusty bought a 38-foot Jayco Eagle 376 FB travel trailer, and the young family drove it to a trailer park in Florida in October 1996, where they paid just $250 in rental fees every month. The trailer came with a bunk room with 4 bunk beds, a small sitting area, a tiny kitchen and dining area, a bath, shower, sink and toilet, a master bedroom with a queen-size bed, and Andrea used the campground's laundromat to do their laundry. The idea of living in a trailer park does not appeal to me, but it's kind of like, this is so simple and cheap and nice. I'm like, my life feels very complicated compared to this. Andrea had been pregnant with their third child when they arrived in Florida, but she suffered a miscarriage months later. However, she fell pregnant again not long after, and their third son, Paul, was born on the 13th of September 1997. They'd since moved back to Texas, but had decided not to move back into their 4-bedroom house and told their families that they realized they didn't need half of the things they put in storage anyway. Instead, they sold the house, most of their belongings in a garage sale, and parked their trailer at the Lazy Days RV campgrounds in Hitchcock, Texas. Wow, they really did it. They really did it. There they befriended Belinda Green, the park's manager, and Rusty often went to ask her for advice on how to live in a trailer and regularly bragged to her that they were now doing pretty well financially since their car was fully paid off and they no longer had a mortgage to worry about. It's so strange, like this, just like bragging about money and stuff, like in this way. It's like, how does that come up? It just feels really uncomfortable. It's like, listen, I sold my house and I live in a car. Some might say that I've made it. Belinda would later explain that she often watched on as Andrea played with her boys. She pulled them along in a red wagon when they made their way to the laundromat and would go swimming with them in the campground swimming pool. They'd pick flowers, and she taught them how to shuck corn. And one summer, they kept a caterpillar as a pet and watched on as it spun a little cocoon and eventually became a butterfly. My kids are fascinated by this. Like the way that like a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. They're like, what? Like, it's true. It's true. Andrea baked elaborate cakes when it was their birthdays, always had a video camera with her, and just like any other proud mum, she recorded almost everything her boys got up to. In Belinda's opinion, Andrea did everything in her power to be the perfect mum, and Rusty would describe Andrea as follows, quote, "She was so involved with the children and just always loved them and held them and read to them and gave them activities to do and talked with them and played with them. She was wonderful." Meanwhile, Rusty had given up golf so that he could help Andrea some more with the kids. Good man, Rusty. And in the afternoons, he would take the boys out on the wagon when they took their garbage to the dumpster. In the evenings, the family would go for walks around the campgrounds while little Noah learned to ride his bicycle, and Belinda would describe Andrea and Rusty as the best young parents I've ever seen. It all does sound very idyllic. It sounds all very nice and summery, like it's the depths of winter right now. And I'm like, God, going for like a walk outside, be nice. Not being freezing cold, not having to put like 7 coats on the children just to go out. In or around April 1998, the Warrenetskis sent out a newsletter and explained that they wanted to sell their converted 1978 GMC bus-turned motorhome, and Rusty thought that they might be able to use the bus to take road trips all over the US, so they hitched their trailer and drove to Miami to visit the Warrenetskis and see whether they should buy the bus. There's a picture of the bus. It's a large bus. When I never saw it, of course, but my nan used to tell me these stories. Like when she was a kid, her parents bought like a double-decker bus and like an old one and converted it. Was it a double-decker bus? Maybe it was just a regular bus. But they took like a big old bus and turned it into like a camper van. And I was like, that's pretty dope. It wasn't very big, just 350 square feet. I mean, it looks big for a bus. Or 32.5 square meters, and the bus needed some work done to make it livable. It had a double bed, a sitting area, a kitchen, a built-in bathroom, washer and dryer, and a hatch in the floor that provided access to the old luggage compartment. It had been converted into an additional sleeping area for the children. That's cool. But could also be used as a playpen. It was smaller than their trailer, but oh really? Jesus Christ, their trailer must be massive. But Rusty figured that they could fix it up to suit their own needs and make it comfortable to live in. However, their time in Miami was filled with righteous judgment and unwanted advice from the Warrenetskis. Michael and Rachel didn't hesitate to tell Rusty that they did not approve of the life they'd built with Andrea and their kids. Chill out, Warrenetskis, you sound fucking mega toxic. The Warrenetskis loved to tell everyone that they were living in a converted bus because they'd seen through the hypocrisy in today's billion-dollar religious systems and instead took the gospel to the highways and byways and the poor of spirit. But according to Suzanne O'Malley, the author of the book Be There Alone, The Unspeakable Crime of Andrea Yates, quote, "It's also possible that the fact that Rusty Yates had $37,000 in his bank account to pay for a motorhome that the Warrenetskis badly wanted to sell raised issues surrounding the older man's own material success or lack thereof it." Yeah, it's a green-eyed monster right there, it seems. They could also just be douchey because they're mega religious, though. Either way, the Warrenetskis had no trouble pointing out all the ways in which the Yates family were straying from God's path. Rusty was obviously choosing his career and comfortable middle-class income above his wife and children. Bruh, chill out. He's providing for them. And I didn't like that he goes off and plays golf all the time, but he seems to be a good dad. Like, you shut the fuck up, Warrenetskis, holier than thou. The Yates three boys were badly misbehaved, and it would be Andrea's fault if they ended up in hell one day, and it was her job to ensure that her children kept as the straight and narrow. In fact, they were all going to end up in hell because according to Michael Woronetsky, everybody is going to hell. Well, apart from the Woronetskys, that is. Yeah, I don't know. People who are like telling you how to parent, or like, I remember I was on a plane and my kids, they were like 4 and 2 or whatever. And it's like, one of them's crying. And it's like, because planes are uncomfortable and their ears are popping. And there was some like old woman sitting in front who was like, oh. And it's like, what the do you want? And of course she doesn't confront anyone, like, because she's a coward. But it's just like, what do you want? What? What's the solution here? What do you want me to do? Tape my kid's mouth shut? Ya bitch! Let's just say my desire to calm my child down in that situation, because I'm a spiteful little bastard, is less. During their visit, Andrea also spent a lot of time around Rachel and her children, and Rachel happily preached to Andrea about what it meant to be a good servant and what it took to raise 6 kids in a glorified bus. That is a lot of kids in 32 square meters. She also went on about how Andrea should homeschool her kids, since Rachel and Michael believed that strange spirits would be able to negatively influence their children while they were in school. After all, according to the Woronetskys, the system was filled with Satan's influence, and everyone who complied with its rules and demands was doomed to end up in hell. Because, once again, the only ones who were truly saved were the Woronetskys and their children. Yeah, alright, it's like, oh, the fucking system, right? And it's like they're driving their bus around. It's like, well, you're driving on the right, are you? I mean, the system, drive on the left, see how that works out for you. Stop being dumb. The system exists for a reason. There's plenty wrong with the system, but it's the best we have. When the Yates family returned to Texas, they breathed a deep sigh of relief. Rusty asked Andrea whether she thought it was a good idea to buy the bus. Andrea told him that she liked the bus. The kids loved the bus, especially the old luggage compartment that had been converted into a playpit/sleeping area. That does sound super cool. Kid Simon would love. Adult Simon would be like, that's dope, secret room. So even though Rusty had his doubts about the bus, he drove back to Miami, bought the bus, and started renovating it to suit the needs of his family. Once he was finished, they sold the trailer and moved into the bus. I love secret compartments and My wife thinks I'm insane, and I am insane. But we have a house, and then there's a garage, like where the car's parked, that is separate from the house. And it's like maybe, 20 meters across the garden. But our house is on a hill, right? So the bottom floor backs up onto just underground. And I'm like, it'd be cool if we had a tunnel going from the house to the garage with a spiral staircase up into the garage so we wouldn't have to go outside in winter and we could just go from our house to our warm cars. And she's like, do you have any idea how expensive that would be? And I'm like, I do not, but it would be extremely cool. And she's like, we're not doing that. I mean, we're not doing it, but it would be awesome, no? Like a secret passageway to your garage? Let me know in the comments. Maybe I can show them to my wife and she'll finally be like, all right, we'll do the stupid secret passage thing. And then we'll have it and she'll be like, so glad we did the secret passage thing. I didn't sell it to her as a secret passage. I sold it to her as a convenience, but really it's a secret passage. Andrea had fallen pregnant while they were visiting the Woronetskys, and their 4th son, Luke, was born on the 15th of February 1999. Noah was 5, John was 3, Paul was just over a year old, and now Andrea had a newborn to care for as well. Wow, that's a lot of young kids. But this time, she had to manage caring for 3 children and a newborn in a converted bus that Belinda Green would describe as being cramped, confining, and claustrophobic. Belinda Green and their other friends at the Lazy Days campground soon began to notice that Andrea had changed ever since Luke was born. She didn't take the boys out to play anymore. They didn't go swimming in the pool, and the boys were no longer allowed to play with Belinda's kids. In fact, they barely saw Andrea. The only person Andrea still confided in was Rachel Woronetsky. Once again, Andrea wrote to her that she felt overwhelmed and depressed. The only response in that situation is just go get checked out. You could be postpartum depression. You probably don't need to feel this way. It's probably a medical thing. Just go get it checked out. But instead, I'm sure we're going to get some religious drivel. And in response, Rachel told her that, quote, you must accept the reality that this life is under the curse of sin and death. There is nothing in you and your emotions. You are a daughter of Eve. You must become a daughter of the Most High. Basically, what Rachel is saying is life is hard, suck it up. Then, when Luke was 4 months old, Andrea called Rusty at work. Andrea was crying and asked me to come home. I dropped what I was doing at work and just drove. I was worried because she sounded like she needed me. I found Andrea in the back room of the bus, bent over, shaking. When Rusty asked her what was wrong, Andrea told him that she needed help. Rusty had no idea how to help her, so he took Andrea, the boys, and their strollers, loaded them into the car, and drove to Galveston, thinking that maybe Andrea just had to get out of the house for a little while. They spent the day wandering the city, seeing the sights, and then Rusty took his family to visit Andrea's parents so Andrea could have a bit of a break from the kids. That next afternoon, Andrea tried to kill herself. Jesus Christ, yeah, okay, so at that point, you gotta get her into hospital. I mean, I don't know much about this stuff, but it does seem like it's postpartum depression. Or something. This is something that is treatable. The baby blues. While the kids were taking a nap, Andrea rifled through her father's prescribed medicines and drank between 40 and 50 tablets of trazodone, a medication that is used to treat depression and anxiety and act as a sedative. Jutta found her shortly after to remind her that Luke needed feeding, and when Andrea confessed to her mother that she'd drank a bottle full of pills and couldn't feed Luke, Jutta called for an ambulance. Rusty had been out running errands and arrived home in time to see the paramedics load Andrea into the back of an ambulance. He went with her to the hospital, and they flushed her stomach. Andrea was admitted to the Methodist Hospital in Texas on the 18th of June, 1999. According to the notes on her intake sheet, Andrea told the nurses that, quote, she doesn't want to die, but wants for the misery to go away. And Dr. James Flack, the psychiatrist on call, noted that she confirms that she thought the medication she was taking would end her life. She just wanted to sleep forever. All right, Dr. Flack, you're the psychiatrist. Let's get her sorted out, please. The nurse also noted that Andrea was still breastfeeding, but had lost a lot of weight within the last month and had poor eye contact, poor concentration, low energy, and fatigue. Because she's depressed. Andrea had also explained that she felt hopeless and depressed and like she wasn't a good mother, and Dr. Flack diagnosed her with depression, noting that she'd suffered a major depressive episode. But he told Rusty that it was entirely possible that Andrea was suffering from postpartum depression. She was to be closely monitored for the duration of her stay in the hospital, but when Andrea was informed that she'd be put on an antidepressant medication, she refused to sign the consent forms and explained that she was still breastfeeding Luke and didn't want to take any medication that could harm him. If you have attempted suicide and you're in hospital and the doctor says that you should take the pills, just take the pills. Just take the pills and give the baby formula. I know formula's not ideal or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. My wife, we were lucky enough not to need formula and to breastfeed. I know lots of people are not. And I think formula's fine, isn't it, these days? Science must have cracked that shit by now. Oh, wait, we did give our kids some formula. Just in addition, we just gave it to them extra. And I didn't like it. I was like, can we stop buying the Nestle formula? Because I don't like Nestle. Because of their baby formulas, like scandals, which if you don't know about, holy shit. Yeah, I guess so. I guess we did. Over the next few days, Andrea improved and would confide in her social worker that she felt ashamed for trying to end her own life. She wanted to know whether the overdose had damaged her body in any way, since they were still planning on having more children, and as the days went by, she grew more and more anxious about just how expensive her stint in hospital was going to be. She also... Doesn't Rusty work for NASA? NASA's a government organization. Aren't they going to have health insurance? She also told Rusty that she felt like she was a bad mother to their boys, and he kept on reassuring her that she was perfect and a great mother. I don't know if that's the best response. You gotta talk it out, right? You can't just be like, no, everything's fine. That's not gonna help someone who's depressed. They need like proper talking and treatment. After a week in the hospital, Andrea was still depressed. Therapy she was receiving did nothing to improve her mood, and their medical insurance was running out, which is crazy America. So Dr. James Flack suggested that maybe it was best if she returned home to her husband and kids. If therapy's not working, you need the medication. You really do. He sent her home with a week's supply of medication and a list of referrals, but warned Rusty that Andrea was still a danger to herself and that she shouldn't be left alone for even a minute. In his discharge notes, he wrote that they have agreed to watch her around the clock and are aware that she's at risk of harming herself again. Rusty had decided that it would be best for Andrea and the kids to stay with her parents until she was better, but after she was discharged from the hospital, her behavior was off. She'd distanced herself from her children, didn't want to play with them anymore, and claimed that they were eating too much. She'd now hold the 5-month-old Luke, but refused to feed him. She'd also begun to scratch her head obsessively to the point that she was balding in spots, and often hid away in the bedroom or lay in bed for hours. She wasn't eating, and she wasn't taking a medication, and when a new psychiatrist prescribed some antipsychotic meds, Andrea flushed them down the toilet. What's the deal here? Is there a point where someone, I know you can section someone, is what we call it in the UK, where it's like you're a danger to yourself And the fact that you don't want to take the medication, I'm sorry, you have to. And they'll put you in a hospital and you have to take the medication. And then hopefully the medication starts working. You're like, holy shit, I should have always been taking the medication. And then you keep taking the medication. When does that happen? I feel like this should definitely happen right about now. Then 3 weeks after she'd been discharged from hospital, Andrea tried to kill herself again. Rusty found her standing in the bathroom, holding a serrated knife to her throat, and he wrestled the knife away from her. She begged him to allow her to end her life, but he managed to calm her down. The next day, he took Andrea to see Dr. Eileen Starbranch. Dr. Starbranch told him to have Andrea admitted as soon as possible for her own safety. Excellent. So that same day, Rusty took her to the Memorial Springs Shadows Glen Hospital. According to Rusty, Andrea was completely catatonic. Not talking, not walking, not eating, just had this blank look on her face. It was terrible. There, the intake nurse noted Andrea had deep scratches on her scalp, arms, legs, and one under her nose, and that they were all self-inflicted. Her new psychiatrist, Dr. Starbranch, went to evaluate her and noted that Andrea was mute, suicidal, and psychotic. She then asked Dr. James Thompson, another psychiatrist who worked at the hospital, to evaluate her. According to Dr. Starbranch, quote, "My primary impression of Andrea was of psychotic depression or depression with psychotic features, with a possibility that Andrea may also be suffering from schizophrenia. I was concerned about Andrea. I was concerned about the severity of her psychological problems, and I wanted to know how good her thinking was, how logical and rational, what kinds of styles of coping with stress she had." Andrea would probably rank up there with the 5 sickest patients I've ever seen with regard to how sick she was when she was admitted and how difficult it was to get her out of her psychosis. The quote ends. Dr. Thompson evaluated her and diagnosed her with major depressive disorder, which was severe, recurrent, and had psychotic features, and sent his suggested treatment plan to Dr. Starbranch, who prescribed a list of medications for Andrea to take. Please, for the love of God, make sure she's taking the medications. Rusty informed the doctors that he wanted Andrea to admit herself to hospital instead of having her committed, since it would give her the authority to make her own decisions regarding her treatment. Rusty, mate, she shouldn't be making her own decisions regarding treatment. I know she's an adult, and I know it's ingrained in our mind that we have autonomy and that we should be making the decisions, but much like someone who's put in prison, we agree that they're there for the safety of other people or as punishment. But a mental institution or a psychiatric facility, or whatever the PC way of calling it, is there, but it's for the protection of people and themselves. And sometimes people don't get to make that decision. They need to have that decision made for them. But Andrea then used this against the doctors by refusing to sign consent forms that would allow them to treat her with certain medications or consult Rusty regarding her medical history. When she didn't improve within a day of being admitted, Rusty managed to convince Andrea to agree to receive an emergency injection or cocktail that included Haldol, which is a powerful, long-acting antipsychotic, which is described as being a last resort since it had too many side effects. The injection also included doses of Cogentin and Ativan, which both worked to counter Haldol's side effects and would help Andrea relax. The cocktail worked almost immediately, and according to Rusty, within a day, Andrea went from being completely catatonic to sitting on the couch with me in the visiting area, and we carried on with what I refer to as just the best conversation we've ever had. The thing I learned about it is that she needed the right medicine. When I saw her respond to the medicine at the time, I thought, wow, there's hope. We can get the old Andrea back. Exactly, you need that medication. By the next day, she became more cooperative and responsive. She eventually agreed to sign the consent forms, yet she still refused to drink her medication or talk to the doctors who were treating her. And when she did, she told them all that all she wanted to do was sleep. According to Dr. Starbranch, quote, "When Andrea was in the hospital, Rusty was there every day, and he was very attentive, begging her to eat, and when she wouldn't eat, begging her to drink or take in fluids, and when she wouldn't drink anything, begging her to give permission to take the medications when she refused them. We gave him special permission to visit outside of regular visiting hours because I felt that his presence was going to be positive for Andrea because she was so shut down." After another shot of the emergency cocktail, Andrea finally started to get better and told a psychiatrist named Dr. James Thompson that the reason why she tried to kill herself was, quote, "I had a fear I would hurt somebody. I thought it better to end my own life and prevent it from happening." Andrea explained that she'd been having both audio and visual hallucinations for years, and that she had the first one after their eldest, Noah, was born. Quote, "There was a voice, and then an image of the knife. I had a vision in my mind, get a knife, get a knife. I had a vision of this person being stabbed." She explained that she had a similar vision dozens of times in the days before she tried to kill herself, and that she tried to fight against the impulse to hurt someone, though she didn't explain who she wanted to hurt. When she was questioned about the possible reasons why she might be stressed, Andrea admitted that she struggled to look after all of her children on her own, but explained that Rusty was the perfect husband and that he had started helping out more since she'd ended up in the hospital the first time. She admitted that she would prefer to move out of the bus and into an apartment or house, and that she also explained that she often worried that she wasn't a good mother, and that one of her greatest concerns were, quote, "the kids, trying to train them up right, being so young, it's a big responsibility. I don't want to fail." Yeah, it just seems like she is desperately trying to be a good mother, but she's been taken by a mental health issue, and just the treatment, the Haldol or whatever it was, seemed to work really well. She just needs to get on to like a less extreme. Just please. I know it's not. It's like as if me saying is going to change how this ends, but it's just. I don't know. It's just a letdown, isn't it? At the end of their sessions, Dr. Thompson wrote in Andrea's file that, quote, "she needs help learning more effective strategies for coping with stress. She needs help developing a more satisfying support system. She needs help developing assertive behavior. She needs help learning to express her emotions appropriately. She is likely to need help organizing her thinking." Great. Okay, this seems extremely smart and sensible, and let's please provide her those things. During the 3 weeks that Andrea spent in the hospital, she still refused to take her medicine. Despite Rusty's observation that the 2 shots of Haldol had seemed to help, the doctors suggested electroshock therapy instead, but Andrea and Rusty rejected the idea. But she's not going to say yes to electroshock therapy when she said no to antidepressant or antipsychotic medicine. Andrea's condition didn't improve, and by the time she was discharged on the 9th of August 1999, she was still in the middle of a depressive episode. She spent the majority of her time in bed, didn't shower or brush her hair unless she was forced to, didn't care what she looked like, and had no interest in taking part in group discussions or conversations with the people around her. Her doctors had prescribed an antidepressant, something for anxiety, and an antipsychotic, and Rusty took on the task of ensuring that Andrea took her medication. Okay, Andrea's mum had also put her foot down and had told Rusty that he had to get Andrea out of the bus and move them into a proper house, so he bought a house on Beachcomber Lane in Clear Lake, Houston, and had started to move the family in while Andrea was still in hospital. Andrea was now scheduled to see a psychiatrist, Dr. Aline Starbranch, at least once a month, and she received a 300mg shot of Haldol every month. Her condition and mental state improved for the better over the course of the next few months, but Andrea told Dr. Starbranch that she hoped to go off her medication soon because they made her feel weak and like a failure, and Andrea wasn't convinced that there was anything wrong with her, apart from her postpartum depression, that is. Yeah, I mean, but you gotta, the drugs are working because you don't think you need the drugs. Both Rusty and Andrea attended therapy together. They discussed how the couple could take some of the pressure off Andrea. Rusty had suggested that they should get a housekeeper, but Dritta had offered to help out with the kids in the morning, and Rusty told their therapist that he was now working half days so that he could help look after the kids in the afternoon. Rusty is a legend. Rusty's really he's here for her, and I like that. It would also allow Andrea to get out of the house on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons so that she could spend more time with her family and friends, but their therapist, Dr. Sonia Burlingame, noted that, nevertheless, stress level will remain high. The couple plans to have Andrea homeschool their children. They also hope to have additional kids. Maybe you shouldn't have additional kids. I know it's like God's plan and all of this, but it's obviously difficult. And don't homeschool. There's a whole, please just send them to regular school. Don't listen to your crazy religious Netsky's friends or whatever it was. Don't listen to them. Just send them to school. School's fine. It's free. And it gives you some time. I like it when my kids go to school in the morning. It's like, love you kids if you're listening in the future. Love you. But you're a lot sometimes, kids. And when they mentioned their plan to expand their family to Dr. Starbranch, she warned them that it wasn't a good idea. In Andrea's patient file, she noted that, quote, apparently Andrea and her husband plan to have as many babies as nature will allow! Exclamation point. This will surely guarantee future psychotic depression. The Mark of the Beast. By November of 1999, the Yates family finished moving into their new house on Beachcomber Lane, and Andrea started homeschooling Noah. During their therapy sessions, both Andrea and Rusty explained that things were back to normal, and that Andrea was like her old self. Andrea received her last shot of Haldol in December, and by January 2000 she'd started exercising. She hadn't had any visions, she was feeling happy and positive again, but Andrea had also insisted that she didn't want to take any of her medication anymore, and Rusty begrudgingly allowed her to do so. According to Dr. Starbranch, let me guess, she's very quickly going to go downhill. The boys joined Rusty and Andrea during their last appointment with her, and Dr. Starbranch had noted that, quote, Andrea was very warm and loving toward the boys, particularly toward the youngest boy. She was chatting with Luke, and he was doing something, and she was saying, oh, you don't want to do that, do you? And in a very friendly kind of way, very loving, very nurturing. I was really impressed. During their appointment, on the 12th of January 2000, Andrea informed Dr. Starbranch that she was no longer taking her other medications and that she wanted to stop having injections of Haldol. When Dr. Starbranch asked why Andrea had stopped taking her medication, both Rusty and Andrea explained that Andrea was doing much better since they'd been discharged from hospital in August 1999 and that she wanted to fall pregnant again. I don't understand that the logical gap there is so strange. Like, she was doing so well in hospital on a medication, so let's stop taking the medical. Why? But once again, Dr. Starbranch advised them against this plan. According to Rusty, Dr. Starbranch told us that sometimes women who suffered from depression or psychosis, there's like a 50% chance that they become depressed again if they had another child, and if they did get depressed, then they would have the same symptoms and they would require the same treatment. That's what she told us, and that was kind of the instruction we went with. Dr. Starbranch warned the couple that if they did fall pregnant, Andrea had to come back after the baby was born so that she could start her medication to keep herself from developing either depression or psychosis again. So both Andrea and Rusty decided to have another child and argued that if Andrea did have another depressive episode, all they had to do was go to Dr. Starbranch and have her prescribe another few doses of Haldol, no biggie. Andrea didn't go to see Dr. Starbranch again, and a month after their last visit to her, Andrea was pregnant. Their daughter, Mary, was born on the 30th of November 2000. Andrea had been homeschooling both Noah and John up to the day of Mary's birth and then continued homeschooling after she returned from the hospital on the 3rd of December. According to Rusty, she seemed to cope just fine, homeschooling her 4 boys and caring for the newborn Mary, but her best friend Debbie Holmes regularly went to visit Andrea and was already growing concerned that she wasn't coping at all. During this time, Andrea had weekly therapy sessions with a social worker called Eileen Wilcott, who would later explain that she got the impression that Andrea was a very devoted mother. She was also very religious, and shortly after they were settled in their new house, Andrea told Ms. Wilcott that she was worried that her children would become too materialistic now that they were living in a house again. So she urged Rusty that they should keep the furnishings in their home to a minimum so as not to spoil their children. I mean, just don't buy them too many toys, no? Over time, Miss Wilkes, they live in a house. Most people do. Over time, Miss Wilcott learned that Andrea didn't feel that she was being a good mother or wife. She and Rusty had an argument over the amount of craft items that were scattered all over the house, and Andrea had bought a book on organizing your house to clear up the clutter. According to Ms. Wilcott, the always overachieving Andrea somehow believed that she had to do everything in her power to be the best homemaker and the best school teacher. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've also that same vibe. Like, I want to be the best version of myself that I could be. I'm pretty competitive. I don't know if I'm an overachiever, but I try to be. And I don't know, I get that. It's like, yeah, I want to be
the very best, like no one ever was.
Not like better than other people, just the best version of myself, you know? After Mary was born, Andrea confided in Ms. Wilcott that she didn't think she was skilled enough to be homeschooling her children, but she didn't think that she had a choice in the matter. Quote, with 4 children and just one income, she did not feel it would be possible to secure private schooling for the children. Well, just don't send them to private school then. If you can't afford private school, you don't have to send them to private school. Like America, you don't provide a lot of free shit for your people, but schooling's free, right? And she and her husband did not feel that their goals for their children could be met in a public school setting. I mean, this is all fantastic and very high-minded, but if it's not reality, it's not reality. Andrea would also confide in Debbie Holmes that she was concerned that 7-year-old Noah wasn't on the same level academically as Debbie's 7-year-old daughter who attended a public school. According to Debbie, Noah could read and write in print, but her daughter's reading was more fluent, and she was already writing in cursive. She also explained that Andrea had told her that Noah wasn't developing properly because he was self-centered, sinful, disobedient, and deceptive. He's 7. Of course he's slightly... like, you can see it now. My daughter is 5. She's learning what deception is. She's learning how to lie, and it's fascinating to see, and she's terrible at it. But then Andrea's father fell ill at the beginning of March. He was admitted to the hospital, where the doctors discovered that he'd developed a subdural hematoma, or bleed on the brain. During his stay in hospital, he got a blood clot in one of his lungs and had to have emergency surgery. But his condition continued to decline, and he asked to go home so that he could die in peace. Oh, Jesus. During this time, Andrea helped care for him, and on the 12th of March 2000, he passed away from multiple organ failure. Jesus Christ. He has like a little bleed on his brain, gets a blood clot, and then just dies like that? Oh my God, we're so fucking fragile. His death hit Andrea hard, and she fell right into another major depressive episode. Debbie Holmes went to see Andrea after her father passed away, and she would later explain that, quote, she would wander through the house, not with any goal intended, just wander around. The children would talk to her, she would look at them, and she would just have an empty look on her face. And her answers were very sharp. No, yes. She was very shaky. Still, she would carry Mary around, and she would just shake with Mary. She was getting progressively thinner and thinner and thinner. When I would hug her, I could tell she didn't have any milk in her breasts. She was very dehydrated. Debbie called Rusty and told him that Andrea was falling into a deep depression again, and he called Dr. Starbranch on the 28th of March, hoping to be able to prescribe Andrea another series of Haldol injections. Instead, Dr. Starbranch advised Andrea that she should be admitted to an inpatient psychiatric hospital immediately. Excellent advice! Listen to your doctor. The Memorial Springs Shadow Glen Hospital had since closed down, and the one that Dr. Starbranch suggested they go to was a 45-minute drive away. Wait, I'm not sure if that's long or short. I don't think that's particularly long. I drive there to and back from work, and it's like 45 minutes. Both ways. It's not that long. Rusty was now looking after their 5 children on his own, and he told Dr. Starbranch that a 45-minute commute would be too disruptive for him and the kids. Well, you're not checking into the hospital. She is. Get her parents to help. She needs to be an inpatient immediately. So he called around looking for any other hospital that was on their medical insurance's network so that Andrea could get some help as soon as possible. On the 30th of March, he came across the Devereaux, Texas Treatment Network, a behavioral treatment center that usually treats teenagers and young adults who have emotional, behavioral, and cognitive differences, or who are suicidal and psychotic and need some time to calm down. According to Rusty, quote, her brother Brian and her mum came over the next day. It was Saturday morning, and Brian and I wanted to take Andrea to Devereaux, but Andrea didn't want to go. Brian's a pretty big guy, and he and I together took Andrea into the truck and brought her to Devereaux. She wouldn't even bend her leg to get into the truck. I had to bend down in order to get her in the truck because she didn't want to go to the hospital. This is fucking hard, but this is absolutely the right decision. They dragged Andrea into the building. Andrea didn't respond when the medical staff asked her questions during her intake exam, so Rusty had to explain that Andrea had stopped eating, wasn't sleeping, and had started to refuse to put their youngest baby, Mary, down. Andrea had told him that she was scared that something bad was going to happen to little Mary, but she wouldn't say what. Andrea's intake sheet noted that she was showing signs of paranoia, was catatonic, didn't seem to be able to process what they were saying to her. Her reactions were blunted, and she seemed to be reacting to internal stimuli, i.e. she was having visions again. She was also once again claiming that she wasn't a good mother, and the doctor who evaluated her, Dr. Ellen Albritton, also noted that Andrea needed stabilization for safety of self and others. When Andrea refused to admit herself for treatment, her new treating psychiatrist, Dr. Mohammed Saeed, had her committed, and he put her on the same series of standard medication she'd been on a year earlier. When she didn't improve after a few days, Rusty asked for a copy of the list of medications that Andrea was on. He noticed that Dr. Saeed had prescribed an antipsychotic called Risperdal for Andrea, and he called Dr. Saeed and told him that Risperdal didn't work on Andrea. The only antipsychotic that seemed to work was Haldol, but Dr. Saeed brushed his concerns aside and insisted that Haldol had too many side effects, and that Andrea would do just fine on the Risperdal. According to Rusty, he trusted the fact that Dr. Saeed was an expert in his field and that, at that time, I just saw all psychiatrists the same. They all have their diploma on the wall. Yeah, but there's good doctors and bad doctors. During her stay in Devereaux, Andrea refused to eat or drink anything unless Rusty was there to encourage her, and she didn't seem to be responding to the treatment she was receiving and didn't say anything during the group counseling sessions. I mean, sure, at first, I get that the doctor's like, well, I don't want to give her the other one. Maybe the previous psychiatrist just didn't give this resveratrol a shot or whatever. But if it's really not working, and you see that when she's under your care, try something else, no? However, since the counseling she was receiving consisted of watching videos on recognizing the symptoms of depression, what happens when you suffer withdrawal, the dangers of becoming addicted to prescription medication, and what effects alcohol has on your body, it's no wonder that Andrea didn't say anything. She also spent hours just pacing around in her room and just sitting staring at nothing, and Rusty explained that her one leg would bounce continuously in what he described as a sewing foot motion. According to Rusty, quote, "On April the 11th, someone at the hospital wanted me to call Dr. Saeed. He said that he wanted to discharge Andrea, and I was shocked. I mean, she was really sick, and I was like, how about tomorrow? I was trying to buy her one more day." That's wild. I mean, is he discharging her because she's not making progress? That seems like but progress has been made before. She has a medical record. Just check it. What's going on? Andrea was partially discharged on the 12th of April, which meant that she had to be at treatment center during the day, but was allowed to sleep at home. Andrea only went back once, then told Rusty that she didn't see why she had to go back to the center, since all they were going to do that day was watch a video on addiction. Rusty would later complain that none of the programs at the center were designed to treat someone with major depression. Well, no offense, but that's because you sent her to the wrong place. You sent her to the convenient place, not the right place. I'm not judging, but this is a facility that's not used to dealing with someone who's suffering from what she's suffering. Andrea was fully discharged on the 18th of April 2001 and was given 2 weeks worth of medication. Now, usually, I'd leave the big twist until later in the episode, but since the goal is to explain what led to the Yates' children's deaths, I feel like I need to explain exactly what was going on in Andrea Yates' head at the time so you can better understand why everything went so horribly wrong from here on out. Oh, I don't feel like her head's almost... It's not... Is it explainable? It just seems like she's very unwell. As we know, Andrea Yates' doctors had already noted that she was psychotic. She was hearing voices and was living in a sort of parallel world to her own, where her mind convinced her that things were just slightly different than they truly were, and she would behave accordingly. She had told her doctors that she often had visions of a knife, of someone being killed with a knife, and of someone telling her to get a knife. She also admitted that she was supposed to hurt someone with that knife, but she never told her doctors who she was supposed to be hurting. However, it should come as no surprise that Andrea Yates was having visions of herself harming her children. Why? Because the devil had told her to. Oh man, she's got that religion on the brain, dude. Andrea was convinced that the mark of the beast, or the number 666, had been written on the crown of her head. She kept scratching at it in an attempt to scrape it off and remove it. She had also asked a local pastor if the devil could read her thoughts, and was relieved when the pastor explained that the devil could only hear her spoken words. Andrea would later explain that she had been relieved when she heard this because it meant that the only way Satan could make her hallucinations a reality would be if she spoke them out loud, which meant that she wouldn't tell anyone what her hallucinations were until it was too late. I mean, it's okay. Like, I feel like, I don't know, if you go to the psychiatrist and stuff, they're not going to be like, oh, what hallucinations do you have? And you're going to be like, I don't want to tell you. They're probably going to be like, that's fine. What's the nature of them? And they'll be like, oh, it's kind of roughly around this. And they'll be like, okay, let's get you some drugs. And I think talking about the nature of hallucinations, it's like talking about dreams. It doesn't mean anything. It's just your brain acting wrong and it needs to be fixed. And I know some people, I don't know, I feel like I'm really banging on about the benefits of medication and all of this stuff, but they clearly worked for her. I said they were going to work, they did, and then she stopped taking them. Debbie Holmes would later explain that Andrea had confided in her after her first breakdown and told her that, quote, when Andrea was sick, all she saw was darkness, even when the lights were on. When Andrea tried to kill herself with the serrated kitchen knife, she looked in the mirror in her parents' pink and green tiled bathroom and saw a face, not her own, looking out at her from the blackness. She felt she was possessed. Satan had either influenced her or possessed her, and was the source of her breakdown. She talked about not being able to wear the crucifix her family had given her, and she had thoughts about hurting someone or something happening to the children. Andrea would later explain that her attempts to kill herself had been her way of keeping this demon inside of her from harming her children, but of course, she was never successful, and she was convinced that medication wasn't going to help her either. Only God could do that. So she and her friend, Debbie, prayed, and they read the Bible together. But of course it didn't help, and after her father passed away, the voices only got louder and more frequent and more insistent. Debbie, stop reading the Bible with your mate and get her some help. According to Rusty, Andrea only got worse after she was discharged from Devereaux. She was still depressed, she still stared off into the distance, and would just stand in the middle of the room and stare at the television without moving. Andrea would later explain that during those times, the devil would be using the television to speak with her, usually while the children were busy watching cartoons, and the devil would tell her that she was being a bad mother. Oh my God, this must be terrifying. This must be so terrifying. Like, I can't, it's even hard to imagine, isn't it? Just like, for someone who's not been there, Just like you're just watching like fucking Peppa Pig. And you're convinced like fucking Daddy Pig's telling you that you're a terrible mother and he's the devil and he's going to harvest your soul or some shit. Like, God, that's fucking creepy. Meanwhile, Rusty's mother, Dora Yates, had come to visit on the 19th of April. Rusty had told her that Andrea was suffering from depression, but she'd later explained that she was shocked at just how sick Andrea was. According to Dora, quote, Andrea appeared almost catatonic. She did not respond in conversation. If I asked her a question or someone else asked her a question, she might answer, but often it was with a delayed answer. She would stare into space. She trembled. Her arms especially would tremble. She would tap her foot. She would sit and stare for an hour, 2 hours. She would scratch her head until it was bald in spots. She bit her lip. She didn't eat. Dora had originally planned to only visit the family for a week, but when she saw the state Andrea was in, yeah, that's not what you expect. You're like, oh yeah, they've got a bout of depression. You'd be like, oh, they're just gonna, be a little disengaged and kind of this sort of more, not stereotypical, but mild depression, for example. And then you see this and you're like, oh boy. She agreed to help Rusty look after both Andrea and the children, and when Rusty left for work in the mornings, Dora would take over. Excellent. I like this. I love these family support networks. I think this is so good. I'm really glad, I have great grandparents, 4 grandparents for my kids, and yeah, it's just, they live far away, but I just know if there was a situation like this, they would be there for me, and that's really, nice and reassuring, and I like that. To quote Dora, I think, no, Rusty, because it's his mother. My mum would come at about 10 a.m. and leave at about 5 p.m. and I would leave at about 9 a.m. and get back at about 6 p.m. So there was an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon when Andrea was left on her own. My mum wanted to give Andrea some time to herself, and neither of us saw Andrea as a danger. We didn't know what she was thinking, so neither of us thought that there would be a problem if we left her by herself for an hour. During this time, Dora Yates would make note of Andrea's other odd behavior. She'd do basic tasks like wash their clothes, but wouldn't hang them to dry. She'd set out the cereal boxes in the morning so the children could have breakfast, but she'd forget to prepare them lunch or feed little Mary. She'd walk through the house like a zombie or walk around the same room up to 30 times without a purpose. She'd set out the clothes for the children to wear, but wouldn't attempt to dress them, and she'd completely abandoned her efforts to homeschool them. When her children talked to her, it would take her some time to answer them, and then it was usually just yes or no answers. She also seemed to distance herself from her 4 older boys, but she had once again become very protective of the 5-month-old Mary and refused to put her down. Debbie went to visit them during this time, and she later explained that Andrea didn't acknowledge her or treated her like a stranger. Just like Andrea, Debbie was a trained nurse, and it didn't take her long to realize that not only was Andrea not eating enough, but she also wasn't taking proper care of herself. She was very dirty. I don't know how long it had been since she bathed. I could smell her body odor. She was very thin, just wandering around the house, just going from room to room with the baby on her lap. Early in May 2001, Andrea saw a municipal water truck pass by the house and became convinced that they hadn't been able to pay their water bills. Thinking that their water would soon be cut off, Andrea prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't have water for several days and started filling up their bathtub. Wow, she is very ill. This has gone beyond, this is just getting much worse. Her hallucinations and stuff are now, coming into the real world. Not in a, the demons aren't coming, but they're she's taking actions based on them, which is new. The 6-year-old Noah saw what his mother was doing and told his grandmother that Mum was busy filling up the bath. When Dora asked Andrea why she was filling up the bathtub at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a dazed-looking Andrea simply replied, "In case I need it." By now, Dora was fully aware that Andrea had tried to take her own life on at least 2 occasions, so she called Rusty and told him that she thought Andrea was going to drown herself. On the 4th of May 2001, Rusty took Andrea back to Dr. Saeed, but this time he insisted that Dr. Saeed had to put Andrea on Haldol. Dr. Saeed agreed to start Andrea on 2 milligrams of Haldol a day, but Rusty told her they'd have to readmit Andrea to the hospital. During their appointment with Dr. Saeed, Andrea didn't say a word. She just stared out in front of her. She needs to be admitted. Come on, Doc, let's get her in. During her second stay, at Devereux, Andrea seemed to improve a little, but not much. The staff had to coax her into getting out of bed, attending group sessions, getting dressed, or eating. Rusty did his best to try and lift her mood and reassured her that he was there for her. But Andrea just sat and stared. One of the other patients would later describe her as being a zombie. When Rusty went to see her on the 14th of May, he was informed that Andrea was being partially discharged again. He was concerned because Andrea was still a zombie, but Dr. Saeed claimed that Andrea was stable and no longer a danger to herself. He gave Rusty a list of medications that Andrea had to take, the same ones that she'd been on before, this time in higher doses, as well as 2 milligrams of Haldol twice daily. Keep in mind that her monthly dose was now 120 milligrams, while the previous effective dose had been 300. Rusty drove Andrea to the Devereux Treatment Center every day for the next 2 weeks. When Rusty's brother Randy came to visit the last weekend of May, he noticed that Andrea wasn't herself. Usually when he came to visit, she'd greet him at the door with a smile and a hug, ask him questions, spend time with the rest of the family, and actively participate in conversations. But this time, quote, she pretty much kept to herself. She didn't say a word. She had Mary with her almost constantly, almost the whole time. She spent most of the time back in the bedroom. She would occasionally walk out to the kitchen, wouldn't say a word, wouldn't look at anybody. During a visit with Dr. Saeed on the 4th of June, Rusty told Dr. Saeed that Andrea wasn't improving. Then he recommended taking her off Haldol because he said Haldol causes a flat face, and that's what Andrea had. Her eyes were open, and her face was kind of blank. The 300 milligrams of Haldol worked before, great. Quote continues, I said, do you want me to take her off cold turkey? And he said, give her 2 milligrams for 2 days, and then take her off. And I said, okay. But Dr. Saeed didn't prescribe Andrea another antipsychotic to replace her dose of Haldol. What? For the next 2 weeks, Andrea barely spoke with anyone, stared off into the distance, and slept the day away. On the 18th of June, Rusty became even more concerned over Andrea's mental health, and he took her to see Dr. Saeed again. Bruh, it's time to get a second opinion. Like, Dr. Saeed doesn't seem to be doing what you want. You just get a second opinion. There's no harm. Just go get a second opinion. If you have a major medical thing, always a good idea to get a second opinion. We were desperate at that point. I would have a little hope from the week before because Andrea had shown improvement, and then she started to decline again. We have lived with this for months. I was beaten. That's why I went to Dr. Saeed's office. She's declined and I'm concerned. Those were the first words out of my mouth. Dr. Saeed asked Andrea if she was considering taking her own life again, and she shook her head in denial. But Rusty told him that the previous night, Andrea had put Mary down, climbed into bed without changing into her pajamas, and had woken up screaming during the early hours in the morning. She then told Rusty that she'd dreamt that she was trapped in their bed. Dr. Saeed then suggested that they should increase her dose of anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication. According to Rusty, she was on 450 milligrams of Effexor and 45 milligrams of Remeron, and he wanted to add 15 more milligrams of Remeron. I said she's already on a real high dose of Effexor, and they are kind of similar medications. And he said, we can go down to 300. Okay, well, this seems like, okay, so he's like upping one and lowering the other because it's not working. He's just trying to find something that works, and he's obviously not keen on Haldol. 2 days later, on the morning of the 20th of June 2001, Rusty had an important meeting at NASA, so he got ready for work, ensuring that the children had some breakfast and watched on as Andrea took her medication. By the time he had to leave for the office at 9 a.m., the children were watching cartoons in the living room and Andrea was busy eating cereal out of the box and staring at nothing. His mother wasn't due to arrive for another hour, so Rusty kissed Andrea and kissed the kids goodbye and left for work. I just read the next line. By 9:45 a.m., all 5 of his children were dead. The way to heaven. When Officer Frank Stumpo arrived at the house on Beachcomber Avenue, Officer David Knapp was waiting for him at the front door. His expression was grim, and when Officer Stumpo asked him what they were dealing with, Officer Knapp explained that there had been a homicide and pointed down the hallway. Officer Stumpo entered the house and noticed a dark-haired woman sitting on a love seat in the living room on his right. Her hair was wet and matted and hung loosely around her face. She was staring at nothing, her face expressionless. Officer Stumpo walked down the carpeted hallway toward the main bedroom, but he didn't notice the series of wet footprints that ran up and down the hallway and into the bathroom. According to Officer Stumpo, when I entered the room, I noticed it was very sparsely furnished and there appeared to be a mattress on the floor. There was no frame to it, and I saw a little head up on the mattress, and I thought it was a doll. The bed had been covered with a damp sheet, and it wasn't until he bent down next to the mattress that Officer Stumpo realized what he was looking at. The head of what looked like a sleeping baby. When he lifted the sheet, he discovered the bodies of the 4 youngest Yates children, the 6-month-old Mary, 3-year-old Paul, 5-year-old John, and 2-year-old Luke. After checking Mary's little body and confirming that she had passed away, Officer Stumpo covered the bodies up again and made his way to the living room. Only later would he discover the body of 7-year-old Noah, floating face down in the bathtub. According to Officer Stumpo, there was this moment in time when all the training I'd received, all the scenes I've made, everything that I'd been taught and learned, an instinct went right out the window. Officer Stumpo was understandably upset by what he'd discovered, and when he asked Officer Knapp what had happened, Officer Knapp pointed toward Andrea and said that she had murdered the kids. Officer Stumpo then turned to Andrea Yates and asked her, "Do you realize what you've done?" Andrea then looked him dead in the eye and calmly said, "Yes, I do." Within minutes, more and more police officers arrived on the scene. Then Rusty arrived. Oh, this is not fun. He saw the police vehicles and jumped out of the car. He was stopped before he could enter the house, and when the police officers told him what had happened, Rusty screamed and collapsed onto the front lawn, yelling and screaming at Andrea and asking why she'd done this to their babies. The next 2 hours were a mess. Dora finally arrived and did her best to comfort her grieving son. Ambulances and the forensics team arrived and started processing the scene, and media vans started lining the street. According to Phil Archer, who was a reporter for KPRC-TV at the time, quote, "The police officers were crying. There was a lot of emotion there. They were the guys who had to go into that house and had to recover the bodies of children. Oldest was 7. And there's not even anyone to be angry at. Like, I don't blame Andrea. She's clearly mentally unwell. And she even got care. She had, it's not like, maybe the medical care wasn't perfect, but it wasn't terrible. And she got that care, and this still happens. It still happened. The police had taped off the scene and were keeping the media at bay. And when news broke that Andrea had drowned her 5 children, the public started speculating about what could have prompted a mother to murder her babies. Throughout all of this, Andrea quietly sat on the couch and just watched the detectives and the police officers as they searched the house and started taking photos of the scene. She answered all of their questions without showing any emotion. When she was told to get up so that they could handcuff her, Andrea calmly went with them. According to Phil Archer, they brought Andrea out, and she looked like a zombie. There was a sort of wildness in her eyes. Officer Stumpo then drove Andrea to the Houston Police Department. When they arrived, the area was swarming with journalists who all tried to get a photo or comment, and Officer Stumpo bitterly told Andrea, "You're going to be a celebrity." Yeah, they don't know. They don't know the story. Once they arrived at the station, Andrea was processed and given a new change of clothes. She was then taken to an interview room where she'd be questioned by Sergeant Eric Mell. He informed her of her rights, and Andrea waived her right to have a lawyer present. She answered all of the questions in monotone, admitted to suffering from depression, and admitted to murdering her children. And when Sergeant Mell asked what her intentions had been when she filled the bathtub with water, Andrea calmly told him to drown the children. When Sergeant Mell asked Andrea if the children had done anything to anger her, Andrea said they hadn't, and when he asked her why she had decided to murder them, she told him that they hadn't been developing correctly, and that she deserved to be punished for being a bad mother to them. While he was questioning her, Andrea would continuously tap her foot, stare off to space for up to 15 seconds at a time, and when she answered him, her answers were short and to the point. She didn't expand on her answers, and she didn't try to make excuses for herself or explain what she'd done. She just sat there and watched him with a sad expression on her face. After her interview was concluded, Andrea was taken to Harris County Jail and was given a room on the 3rd floor. It housed the Mental Health and Mental Retardation Authority, or MHMRA, and was run by several medical professionals who specialized in treating mentally ill inmates. Because Andrea was considered to be at risk of harming herself, she was stripped of all her clothing and her glasses and was placed in an empty cell that had been stripped of its mattress and bedding. She was then provided a suicide blanket, a heavy, lead-infused garment that reportedly looks a lot like a moving blanket and is too heavy or rigid for a patient to use to strangle themselves. A nurse was then appointed to check up on her every 15 minutes. Andrea was given a dose of 2 milligrams of Ativan, a medication, like Valium, that's used to treat anxiety and insomnia, and which reportedly also acts as a sort of truth serum. According to Dr. Melissa Ferguson, one of the 2 forensic psychiatrists who treated Andrea during her stay at MHMRA, quote, "Ativan is a treatment for patients who are mute. The side effect of Ativan is that it actually reduces the inhibition, much in the way that alcohol can reduce the inhibition." Andrea spent the night either sitting on her bunk or lying down on it, and by the time Dr. Ferguson met with her the following morning, the Ativan had already begun to work its magic. Andrea was then given some clothes to wear, and when Dr. Ferguson met her, quote, Andrea's posture was very stooped, her hair was oily, and she didn't look like she had washed it in a while. She had a sore on her lip that was bleeding, and she was picking at the top of her head. Dr. Ferguson would later explain that Andrea appeared to have slowed, meaning that she moved slowly, walked slowly, and responded slowly to questions. Just like the day before, Andrea didn't show any emotion. She stared off into the distance and took several seconds to answer her questions. And Dr. Ferguson would note that it was a clear indicator that Andrea was actively hallucinating during their interview. Dr. Ferguson introduced herself to Andrea and started asking her a series of questions that had been formulated to give her an idea of what was going on in Andrea's mind, and which would help her to diagnose Andrea with postpartum psychosis, a condition that affects 1 of every 1,000 new mothers, especially ones that already suffer from bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. She didn't have any mental conditions before the children, though, right? But I suppose that's just some people, at least that we know of. She could have masked them or hidden them. During a visit, Dr. Ferguson got Andrea to admit that she'd been severely depressed for months. Andrea explained that she'd gotten very close with her father and that he'd suffered a stroke earlier in the year and then had refused to eat. She was convinced that he'd slowly starved himself to death, and Andrea had blamed herself for not being able to help him. She is just delusional. I mean, we know this, but it's such a strange disease. She then explained that after her father passed away, she'd lost all motivation. She'd stopped homeschooling Noah and John, had no interest in having sex with Rusty, and stopped looking after herself. According to Dr. Ferguson, Andrea deliberately stopped breastfeeding her daughter because she was convinced that the medicine trazodone, which she had overdosed on 2 years earlier, was trapped inside her breast. Yeah, delusions. Dr. Ferguson would later explain that it had been around this time that Andrea's psychosis had started acting up again, and she started living in an alternate version of reality. Andrea became convinced that either the FBI or the CIA had put cameras all over her house and were monitoring everything she did, and that they were going to punish her for being a bad mother. Yes, that's definitely what the FBI and CIA are working on day to day, making sure people are good mothers. They're not out there hunting terrorists. She told Dr. Ferguson that she was possessed, that she was surrounded by demons, and that she often heard growling noises coming through the walls. Satan also started speaking to her through movies and cartoons and told her that she and her children wouldn't be able to escape him. She also came to believe that she had to kill herself if she wanted to be able to save her children from going to hell, because the Bible explicitly said that, quote, "It is better to tie a millstone around your neck and cast yourself into the river than to cause children to stumble in their faith." Rusty was actively keeping her from attempting to take her own life, so that was no longer an option, and as time went on, Andrea fell deeper and deeper into psychosis. Quoting again, "The children were watching cartoons at some point, and when Andrea went over to the television to see what they were watching, the cartoons suddenly gave her a direct message, and that message was about them eating too much sugar, and that she was a bad mother." In the days leading up to her murdering her children, Andrea became convinced that because she was a bad mother, her children were doomed to end up in hell, and the only way to save them and ensure that they'd be allowed to go to heaven was to sacrifice them. She knew that it was wrong, that she would be punished for it, and that she would end up in hell for murdering her children, but she was willing to do it if it would save their souls. This episode. There's 5 children are dead and there's no one really to be angry at. It's weird. For the majority of the interview, Andrea didn't show any emotion, but when she started explaining to Dr. Ferguson how she'd murdered her children, Andrea started to break down and grieve the loss of her babies. According to Dr. Ferguson, quote, "She screamed, 'I was so stupid. Couldn't I have killed just one to fulfill the prophecy? Couldn't I have offered Mary? Are they in heaven?' Dr. Ferguson would later explain that she had to put an end to the interview at that point because Andrea was simply too upset to continue. But on her way back to her cell, Andrea asked if she could have a razor. No, you may not. When Dr. Ferguson asked her why she needed a razor, Andrea said that she wanted to shave her hair so that she could see the mark of the beast and whether it was still engraved on the crown of her head. At one point, she stated that she could not destroy Satan, but that Governor George Bush would have to destroy Satan. Okie dokie. Insanity on trial. In the days that followed, the murder of the 5 Yates children became international news, and the public started looking for reasons to blame their deaths on both Rusty and Andrea. dude, Rusty and Andrea, poor fucking Rusty, dude. Fuck me. And it's like, it's so hard because I empathize with this family. I'm a young father. I'm a father of young kids. I'm not young. And it's like that fucking Madeleine McCann episode where it's just like, I don't know, having this happen to your kids, man. Oh, okay. Journalists spoke to the Yates family neighbors and learned that they hadn't known Andrea and had barely seen her leave the house. They dug into their past and learned that the Yates family had once lived in a trailer and then converted a bus that still stood in their driveway, and the media started speculating about whether the Yates family's unconventional lifestyle had resulted in their children's deaths. How about fucking media? You don't fucking speculate about shit that you have no idea about. I know it's asking a lot of you, but Jesus Christ, pieces of shit. I'm not even angry at the media. I just want someone to be angry at. They learned that Andrea had been treated for depression and that a social worker had spoken with her during her stay in the hospital in 1999 and had reported the family to Child Protective Services over concerns that the children were sleeping in an old storage compartment in the bus. The public speculated that Andrea had resented their lifestyle and had murdered her children to punish her husband. They blamed off with the public with the speculation. They blamed Rusty for forcing his wife to have so many children and accused him of being domineering and neglectful. Based on what? Based on that he used to play golf when everything was fine? It's fucking ridiculous. And when he agreed to several televised interviews to explain that Andrea had been mentally ill for some time and had been receiving treatment for depression, his calm demeanor, soft smiles, and public support for Andrea during televised interviews led him to being accused of being complicit in the murders of their children. According to defense attorney George Parnham, quote, "Public opinion about Andrea obviously was negative to say the least. People did not understand the issue of mental illness." This was 25 years ago, and I think that has taken huge leaps and bounds in the last 25 years. So it's hard to imagine how things were thought of back then, but people definitely didn't understand the way they do today. And I think what's really nice is we are getting much better grip of mental health and how important that. We've been dealing with physical health for a really long time, and I think we're finally starting to wake up as a society, as humanity, that looking after our brains also super important. And not just physically, but mentally. In the months that followed the death of her children, Andrea finally received the treatment she needed. She now received antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and a daily 15 milligram dose of Haldol, but it still took months for her psychotic episodes to come to an end. And as her mind cleared, the reality of what she'd done hit with full force. Andrea Yates then had to grieve the loss of not only her children, but her life, and her marriage to Rusty as well, since she knew there was no way he would want to still be married to her after what she'd done. According to forensic psychologist Dr. Jodie Johnson, quote, "One of the most, this is so crazy. It's like she was mentally ill, but you can't blame Rusty. You can't blame Rusty here. How could you stay in that situation? Even though, one of the most heartbreaking things is when somebody has had psychosis and they've done something violent when they were psychotic, and they now realize that I have taken the lives of the people I love most. I'm responsible for that. Some people never get over that." Meanwhile, Andrea's mother and brothers had appointed defense attorney George Parnham to represent Andrea, and when she was diagnosed with postpartum depression, both Rusty and George Parnham did their best to educate the public about it and gain some support for their case. But it was easier said than done. Andrea's doctors and the medical community understood that Andrea had been severely mentally ill when she'd murdered her children, but the public was calling for her head on a pike. And since the crime had taken place in Texas, the public prosecutor's office confirmed that they would be asking for the death penalty. That's insanity. That's insane. That is... Surely she is, 1, not competent to stand trial, and 2, how about public prosecutor's office? You don't bend to the mob, and you think about this sensibly as an educated person who, I just spent 20 pages reading about this, and I understand. How about you spend 20 pages reading about it and understand? Andrea's murder trial kicked off on the 18th of February 2002 and was held at the Harris County District Court. It was heard by Judge Belinda Hill, and the court heard that Andrea Yates was being charged with causing the death of 3 of her children, 7-year-old Noah, 5-year-old John, and 6-month-old Mary. That way, if things went south, the state could later charge her with 2 more murders if necessary. That doesn't seem ethical. When Andrea was asked to submit a plea, she stated that she was not guilty by means of insanity. The problem was that Section 8.1 of Texas's penal law had two qualifiers for the insanity defense. Oh my god, if she doesn't meet these, who the fuck does? 1, the defendant has to prove that at the time the crime took place, she was suffering from a severe mental disease or defect, easily yes, and 2, they did not know that their conduct at the time of the crime was wrong. Wow, that's complicated, and the reason we have trial is interpretation of laws and statutes, so the courts can be like, well, we're interpreting it this way. And I would hope that they could get an interpretation that while she knew what she was doing was wrong, she wasn't making that decision based on reality. Well, she doesn't think it's wrong. She thinks it's right. She thinks that she's saving them. She literally thinks that she's saving them. She thinks it's right. She thinks that if she lets them live, they'll go to hell, and she wants to stop that. It sounds crazy because it is crazy, but it also fits this definition, in my non-legal opinion. Since Andrea had said from the beginning that she knew she had to be punished for what she did, that was going to be hard to prove. State Prosecutor Joseph Owumbi kicked off the trial by explaining that Andrea Yates had drowned her children, and as far as the state was concerned, she was presumed to be sane. He gave a brief summary of the case and then explained that, quote, "We anticipate that you will hear that her motive was altruistic. The children were not developing correctly and she was a bad mother and needed to be punished. That this is not a motive like robbery or theft. It is an altruistic motive, meaning that she thought it was right and good to do this to these children. Right, so she didn't know that the crime was wrong. You're arguing against yourself." Anyway, he continues, "You will also hear evidence that she knew it was an illegal thing, that it was a sin, that it was wrong. Yeah, but she doesn't think it's wrong. She understands that short-term wrong, long-term right. This isn't some black and white thing. We anticipate that you'll hear about treatments that are effective, treatments that are not effective, and what should have been done and whose fault this is. We don't have to prove whose fault this is. We don't have to defend the mental health system of the United States of America. We don't have to agree or disagree whether postpartum depression is a problem. We don't have to advocate for this treatment or that treatment. The state of Texas has to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that while Andrea Yates is presumed to be sane, she murdered her children." Well, okay, I think it's fine to start with a presumption of sanity. It seems like it's going to be very, very easy to dismantle that presumption, though. Anyway, when it was defense attorney George Parnham's turn to address the jury, the grey-haired Santa lookalike told the jury that, quote, "The moment for which you were selected for this trial has arrived. You'll hear evidence during the presentation of this case on a number of issues. The question that we hope the evidence will answer is, how does a mother who has given birth, who has nurtured, who has protected, and who has loved the 5 children that she's brought into this world, interrupt their lives?" The testimony in this case will support the position that Andrea P. Yates was suffering from a severe case of psychosis. Postpartum depression with psychotic features is the cruelest and most severe form of mental illness. It takes the very nature and essence of motherhood to nurture, protect, and love, and changes its reality. You will hear that Andrea Yates was one of the most mentally ill individuals that Dr. Ferguson has ever seen, that in her opinion, Angela Yates was suffering from this same psychosis at the time she was interviewed by Detective Mel, and at the time the children were drowned. I don't understand why Mr. Parnham here is not going to have such a... I feel like you get filled in on the case and you'll be like, she needs treatment. She is not well. Is it possible that people disagree? I feel like just the way that this is being written implies that this, in my opinion, is not the common one. I don't know anything about this case until now, but I'm very surprised, like, with the benefit of hindsight, once all the information has come out, at the time, obviously, head on a pike, whatever, woman kills her children. But we're two and a half decades down the line. Surely we've come around to this. Over the next few days, the prosecution called the various police officers who'd been there on the morning of the 20th of June 2001 to explain what they'd seen that day. They all described Andrea as being cold and emotionless when they met her, and all agreed with Mr. Parnham that during their interviews with her, Andrea had been staring off into the distance and would pause for long moments before answering their questions. Then the prosecution put up 3 displays in the courtroom. The clothes that Noah, John, and Mary had been wearing when they'd died that morning, to remind the jury just how small they'd been when they'd died. It's a bit underhanded. I mean, it's not. I can't say that, because if this was a child murderer, like a bad person, and they were doing this, I'll be like, yeah, show that jury, get them in the chair. So I can't say that this is underhanded if I'm being fair. He has a job. I think it's kind of outrageous that it's got this far, but he does have a job. The medical examiners explained that Andrea had taken her children into the bathroom, one by one, drowned them, and then placed their bodies on the bed before she went to fetch the next child. Because Mary was the smallest, she hadn't put up much of a struggle, but Noah and John's arms and legs were covered in bruises from the force Andrea had to apply to keep them underwater. However, other than the bruises they'd sustained that morning, all the children were well fed, well cared for, and showed no other signs of abuse. And for the duration of the trial, defense attorney Barnum would make a point of reminding the jury that by all accounts, Andrea had been a loving and caring mother, and that her actions that day had been out of character for her. The defense's first witness was Dr. Melissa Ferguson. She explained her role at the Mental Health and Mental Retardation Authority and described her first meeting with Andrea on the day following her arrest. Dr. Ferguson explained that she had performed a psychiatric evaluation on Andrea, and that the questions she had asked her consisted of close-ended questions and open-ended questions. She explained that the close-ended questions were based in fact: what day it is, are you depressed, are you cold, etc. The open-ended questions were designed to challenge Andrea to come up with an answer, and they were the ones that would result in her taking several seconds to answer because she was actively paying attention to the visions she was seeing. An example would be something as simple as, "What are you thinking right now?" Dr. Ferguson explained that Andrea had no problem answering the closed-ended questions and that it would explain why she had been able to answer the questions that the detectives had asked her, despite the fact that she was in the middle of a psychotic episode. Dr. Ferguson explained also that she had asked several questions to test Andrea's perception of reality and realized pretty quickly that Andrea was not fully aware of her needs and surroundings. An example given was the fact that Andrea hadn't asked for a bath and hadn't been aware that there wasn't any toilet paper in her cell, indicating her inability to care for herself properly. This all led her to diagnose Andrea Yates with postpartum depression and major depressive disorder. Dr. Ferguson then went on to explain that Andrea also suffered from several delusions, all of which affected her behavior. In this case, delusions defined as, quoting, "a false, unshakable belief which is contrary to fact and appropriate to the person's education, intelligence, and culture, and they adhere to it despite the tangible evidence that it is false." According to Dr. Ferguson, Andrea was convinced that the CIA and FBI had her under surveillance and that Governor George Bush would punish her for being a bad mother. How is this in court? She's clearly not competent. The fact that at the time George Bush was already the president of the United States, I was thinking that. Wait, he was president from January 2001, right? 9/11 happened in his first year in office. That's what I remember, so it must have been January. Andrea was also convinced that there were cameras in the light fixtures all over her house and had asked Dr. Ferguson how long she herself had been under surveillance, possibly referring to the large number of cameras that were located all over the ward. Her second delusion is referred to as somatic symptoms. People who have delusions of somatic symptoms believe their bodies are somehow compromised. For example, quote, their bodies are infested with worms, one of their arms has fallen off, that their brain is being eaten by an alien, or that they have a transconductor trapped in their breast. What's a transconductor? In Andrea's case, she believed that her breast milk contained trazodone, the sedative she'd tried to overdose on. As a result, once she became depressed and started experiencing psychotic episodes in March 2001, she refused to breastfeed Mary because Andrea didn't want her breast milk to harm her. Her third delusion consisted of her belief that she was guilty of committing the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, envy, gluttony, and sloth, and that she was destined to go to hell. Her fourth delusion, Jesus Christ, it's a lot of delusions, isn't it? It's so much. Her fourth delusion was centered around the belief that she was a bad mother, and her fifth delusion was her guilt regarding her belief that she was failing her children. Well, 4 and 5 seem to be very tied. Then there were her delusions being controlled by Satan, and Andrea would report that she heard demonic voices coming through the walls and that hellhounds were stalking her. These delusions tied in with her religious delusions, making it 7 types of delusions in total. According to Dr. Ferguson, Andrea believed that Satan had placed thoughts in her mind and that those thoughts were not her thoughts, and they were his own thoughts. In other words, he could control what she was thinking. Delusions regarding religious beliefs are more than just extreme religious beliefs. They consist of good versus evil, Satan versus God. The quote ends. And all these delusions together formed Andrea's belief that the only way in which she could save her children from Satan, aka herself, was to kill them. In turn, George Bush would punish her. This is such a strange sentence to read. It just speaks to her delusion. would punish her for being a bad mother by sentencing her to death, thereby killing Satan, since he lived inside of her, and so good would triumph over evil. Dr. Ferguson explained that when she'd asked Andrea if she was mentally ill, she denied it. Andrea admitted that she suffered from depression, but that she'd already accepted her visions and hallucinations as reality, which according to Dr. Ferguson, quote, is an indication of the severity of the illness because it tells you that there has been a breakdown in several areas of judgment and insight. I've been practicing psychiatry for 16 years. When I saw her on June the 21st, 2001, I would say in all the patients that I treated for major depression with psychotic features, she was one of the sickest patients I have ever seen. But the prosecution countered this by explaining that of course Andrea Yates had felt that she was being watched. After all, there were several cameras located in the hallways outside of her cell, the interview room, and in her cell. I mean, well, yeah, but she also thought they were in the light fixtures. They're not. They're not in the light fixtures. They're clearly visible because it's 2001 and cameras ain't that small. And of course, she would report that she was hearing voices. All the cells had intercoms in them that would play music to the inmates, and they could be used to speak to the inmates directly. Yeah, but they're not saying demonic like kill your children. That would be extremely fucked up if they were. Even if no one spoke directly to Andrea, it was entirely possible that she'd still heard voices coming through the walls. It didn't mean that she was insane. What are you talking about? That is insane. Then the defense called on Dr. George Ringholz, who was an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry and the chief of section on neurology and psychology at the Baylor College of Medicine at the time. Prosecution not calling any doctors, are they? No, it's always the defense calling doctors. I wonder why that is. Maybe because the doctors are like, she's fucking insane. He had been referred to the defense by Dr. Lucy Purrier, a psychiatrist who specializes in postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis and who had been treating Andrea Yates for some time at that point. He explained that he had performed several tests on Andrea after her arrest and had read various reports that had been written about her case. He also went through her medical history all the way back to high school. How's he getting her medical history? Oh, I guess they released it to him. So, okay. This enabled him to diagnose Andrea Yates with schizophrenia and comorbid depressive disorder. He would go on to explain that, quote, quite a long quote here, in addition to being a psychiatric illness, schizophrenia is clearly a brain disorder that causes changes in brain functioning, and those changes result in significant impairment in a number of areas. This causes changes in anything. They cause disordered thoughts. They cause changes in feeling and emotions, oftentimes the lack of emotions or splitting off of emotions, and oftentimes very unusual or strange peculiar behaviors. The positive symptoms are things such as hallucinations, delusions, illusions, or changes in the sense of self-perception. Also, positive here means things that manifest themselves, whereas negative seems to be internal things rather than, yeah, it's a positive symptom. Hallucinations, they're great. Sorry, the quote continues, negative symptoms involve things like decreased content of speech or amount of speech, problems with slowness, increased latency changes, which mean there is a flat effect, patients seem emotionless, and tend to isolate themselves and stop interacting with other individuals. In order to make a diagnosis of schizophrenia, there should be continuous signs of disturbance for at least 6 months, and that can be positive and negative symptoms. The quote ends. Okay, there we go. Clearly she meets these. When he was asked if he disagreed with Dr. Ferguson's diagnosis of postpartum psychosis, he explained that people who were already suffering from schizophrenia or bipolar disorder had a higher chance of developing postpartum psychosis, so the two went hand in hand. He also pointed out that Dr. Ferguson had made a note on Andrea's file that she hadn't ruled out schizophrenia as the cause of Andrea's psychosis. It's just that at the time she was told that the symptoms began shortly after Noah's birth and only got worse after each child was born. Hence why her initial diagnosis was postpartum psychosis. But he went on to explain that, quote, an individual with schizophrenia has psychosis outside of the postpartum period, 4 to 6 weeks after the birth of a child. And that can be either positive or negative symptoms. Oftentimes, the symptoms are considerably worse in the postpartum period. That's an exacerbating factor, and sometimes the person will be functioning reasonably well, although they have schizophrenia, and in the postpartum period become acutely psychotic and not connected with reality. Again, seems to fit her perfectly. Dr. Ringholz explained that Andrea's short stints in the hospital wouldn't have been enough for any psychiatrist to officially diagnose her with schizophrenia, since they'd have had to go back through her medical history to pick up on it. Wait, she's checked into a psychiatric hospital, and then they're like, it's not long enough to diagnose her because they'd have to go through her medical history. What, are you telling me she doesn't have her medical history gone through when she checks into a psychiatric hospital? I feel like you go for like a dental x-ray, and they're like, you want any drugs? You had any surgeries? You got any, your parents died of any weird diseases? It's like, you're scanning my teeth. What do you need to know this for? He learned that Andrea's family had a history of mental illness. Her father had depression, as did a brother and sister, and another brother had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder when he was in his 20s. Furthermore, Andrea had told him that she'd often had depression in high school, and when Dr. Ringholtz sat down and talked with her mother, she explained that when Andrea was a teenager, she had been intelligent and a hard worker, but a bit of a loner. Quote, she never went to parties, never attended dances, never dated during high school. Essentially, she was very much isolated. That can be seen in any number of individuals, but in someone you're going to consider for a diagnosis of schizophrenia, those are some things you want to see in their history. Well, there we go. It all continues to add up. Dr. Ringholtz also explains that he conducted a series of neurological tests on Andrea Yates, which included her reflexes. One of these was the glabella function, something we can test together. Oh, is this the knee thing? The jerky knee? Now tap yourself on the forehead several times and try not to blink. Oh. Okay, well, that's a different thing. Let's do it. Okay, no problem. I don't blink. It's going to be, if you don't blink, you're a psychopath. If you manage not to blink when you tap yourself on the head, then very well done. You passed the test. Okay, good. According to Dr. Ringholtz, the only people who can't keep themselves from blinking are babies and young children, people with severe brain disorders such as dementia and Alzheimer's disease, or people with an abnormal frontal lobe, which includes people with a frontal lobe tumor or schizophrenia. And it was a test that Andrea had failed. Please note that if you did blink, this is not a qualified medical diagnosis and you should consult your doctor before you yell at us in the comments. Anyway, according to Dr. Ringholtz, the average score on the neurological tests he ran is 9.6. Andrea scored 18, which indicated that her brain was severely impaired. Together with all the other tests Dr. Ringholtz and his team ran, they were able to confirm on the 20th of June 2001 that Andrea Yates was, quote, severely mentally ill and was in the course of an acute psychotic episode. Now, I'd like to remind you that this satisfies the first requirement of the not guilty by means of insanity plea. And when Dr. Ringholtz asked whether or not Andrea would have been able to know right from wrong on the day she drowned her children, Dr. Ringholtz told the court that in his opinion, it is a result of her severe illness and the type and severity of her psychotic illness that she does not know that the actions she took on that day were wrong. Which in my opinion satisfies the second requirement. Not that the prosecution agreed. Well, no, the prosecution's not going to agree, otherwise they wouldn't have brought it to trial, would they? They're well aware of that second requirement. I'd like to see how they think they can fucking get it. I don't think so. When it was prosecutor Joseph Owumbi's turn to cross-examine Dr. Ringholtz, he pointed out that postpartum psychosis wasn't listed as a known mental disorder in the DSM, aka the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. He pointed out that the literature that did mention it had noted that it had a postpartum onset, meaning that new mothers showed signs of suffering from postpartum psychosis when their babies were between 4 and 6 weeks old, yet Andrea Yates had been diagnosed with postpartum depression with psychosis and postpartum psychosis when both Luke and Mary were already 4 months old. Okay, seems seems weak to me, but okay. By prosecutor Owumbi's reasoning, that meant that Andrea Yates didn't suffer from postpartum psychosis. Well, maybe she just suffers from regular psychosis or schizophrenia. She's clearly sick. She's clearly sick. Why do I have to keep having to shout this? By prosecutor Owumbi's reasoning, that meant that Andrea Yates didn't suffer from postpartum psychosis, and he suggested that the defense had realized that, which is why they'd asked Dr. Ringholtz to come up with a better excuse for why Andrea had murdered her children: schizophrenia, a more well-known and scary mental illness. He then went on to argue that people with schizophrenia are more than capable of making their own decisions. They have a choice in how they act and what they do, not like epileptic patients who can't control their bodies when they're having a seizure, and not like people with Tourette syndrome who have no control over their tics and can't be held responsible for things they do or say, which meant that Andrea Yates would have full control over her actions that day and had still decided to murder her children. Quote, it's not sufficient to say that because she has schizophrenia, therefore she is legally insane. No. I agree with you. But what they've done is established a wealth of evidence showing that she did not understand what she was doing. As for knowing the difference between right or wrong, prosecutor Owumbi pointed out that Andrea had believed that Satan had encouraged her to kill her children. that as a religious person, she would have associated Satan with everything that is evil in the world. She drowned her children that day because she knew there was no one at home to stop her, because she knew that what she was doing was wrong and that she was going to hell for it, that George Bush was going to punish her for it. All of this proves that Andrea knew what she did that morning was wrong. No, it doesn't! No, it fucking doesn't! What are you talking about? It's like, well, she knew what she was doing was wrong because she waited for no one to be home when she did it. No, she thought what she was doing was right, so she waited for when no one was home so she could do it, because she thinks no one else understands. That doesn't mean she meant to do it, and she knew it was wrong. God damn, this is insane! And according to Texas law, that meant that Andrea Yates was guilty of murder. Rocket fuel. When Dr. Mohammed Saeed was called to the stand, Mr. Parnham asked him the same series of questions that he asked every other expert witness. What do you do? What are your qualifications? Where are you employed? Etc. Dr. Saeed explained that he was a psychiatrist, that he had 17 years of experience back in 2001, and he used to be employed by the Devereaux, Texas Treatment Network. He was let go a few months before Andrea's murder trial, though he still sees some of his patients there if they were admitted for treatment. Dr. Saeed then explained that whenever a new patient was admitted, the administrative staff would draw up a new patient file containing all their information and the various assessments performed when a patient arrived at the center. During their stay, the nursing staff and Dr. Saeed would make notes in the patient's file to record the treatment that they were receiving and whether or not they could see any progress. Dr. Saeed also explained that he relied heavily on the nurses' notes and commentary since they spent more time with the patients than he did, and that he always consulted the nurses before making any decision regarding the patient's care. Mr. Barnum then took Dr. Saeed through his first meeting with Andrea. Dr. Saeed told the court that the first time he'd met Andrea was on the 1st of April 2001. He had diagnosed her with postpartum depression, recurrent, based on the history that Rusty had provided, and that he hadn't ruled out psychosis, even though he didn't see any symptoms that would suggest that Andrea was suffering from psychosis at the time. He then filed a petition to the court to have Andrea involuntarily committed to the Devereaux Treatment Center and sent in a list of medications that she would potentially receive during a stay in the hospital, which included medication to treat depression and anxiety, an antipsychotic called Risperidol, and several medicines that helped to relieve some of the side effects of that medication. Dr. Saeed then explained that, according to his notes, Andrea showed a significant improvement over the course of the next 2 weeks, which prompted him to have her discharged from inpatient care. Mr. Parnham then asked Dr. Saeed why he hadn't tried to get a hold of Andrea's medical records during her first day at the Devereaux Treatment Center, because if he did, he would have already known that she was psychotic, that Dr. Starbranch had suspected that she might have schizophrenia, and that a monthly dose of 300 milligrams of Haldol had proven to be an effective dose for her. Dr. Saeed then argued that he had. His office had made multiple calls to Dr. Starbranch's office, and a fax was sent for copies of Andrea's medical records. However, according to his own records, and the ones that Dr. Starbranch's office had kept, Dr. Saeed only asked for a copy of Andrea's medical records after her second stay at Devereaux. He's trying to cover his ass, or he's misremembering? Not sure. But I don't think he's doing it out of any malice. He's probably just, I don't know. I don't want to comment. I don't want to comment on him. He's probably still around. Don't want to get sued. Mr. Parnham then drew the court's attention to the notes that Dr. Saeed had made on Andrea's file 2 days before he discharged her that first time, which said, patient seen, family visited, staff moved patient to solid food, hydration appears okay, patient described her condition as about the same, denies side effects from medication. However, just above Dr. Saeed's note, a nurse had made a note that said the only time Andrea would drink any water was when she drank her medication, and that she was refusing nourishment, that she was still depressed, and that she was at risk of harming herself. Then Mr. Parnham pointed out that Yates' medical insurance had provided Dr. Saeed with a pre-certified or authorization letter which only stated they were willing to cover Andrea's medical expenses for those 2 weeks. Mr. Parnham then suggested that the reason why Dr. Saeed had discharged Andrea on the 13th of April 2001 was because her 2 weeks were up. Of course, Dr. Saeed denies this. Is Dr. Saeed financially invested in the hospital? I doubt it. They let him go before the trial. So, no. He doesn't have a motivation. He doesn't have a motivation to kick her out. Does he? It's also the husband works for NASA. They can probably afford it if push comes to shove. They then discussed Andrea's second admission to the Devereaux Treatment Center, and that Dr. Saeed had only prescribed a daily dose of Haldol for Andrea after Rusty had insisted on it. Once again, he had to admit that he'd told Rusty that Andrea was no longer a danger to herself and could go home after just 10 days at Devereux, despite the fact that Andrea was still on suicide watch. What's more, the attending nurse's notes clearly stated that Andrea still wasn't eating, seemed to be responding to a number of phobias or delusions, and was still unable to look after herself properly. Then, Mr. Parnham discussed Dr. Saeed's decision to take Andrea off Haldol less than a month after her second admission, even though she showed no signs of having improved over the course of the last month. He showed the court Dr. Saeed's notes that clearly stated that on the 18th of June 2001, 2 days before she drowned her children, Dr. Saeed wrote in Andrea's file that she didn't have any intent to harm herself and didn't show any symptoms of psychosis. And yet, just 3 days later, Dr. Saeed added another note to Andrea's file that stated that she'd drowned her children and had been arrested. When it was the state's turn to question Dr. Saeed, prosecutor Joseph Owenby asked Dr. Saeed why he had taken her off Haldol. Dr. Saeed explained that one of the side effects of Haldol was a flat affect or lack of expression, which we now know is a symptom of psychosis, and that he thought that the Haldol might be masking the effects that her antidepressant medication was having. Yet during the trial, Dr. Saeed would continue to insist that the last time he'd seen Andrea leave, she hadn't been showing any symptoms of psychosis. Now, the following wasn't explained in detail during the trial and was revealed later, and since I think it provides us with a better idea of what effect Dr. Saeed's mismanagement of Andrea's treatment had, I'm including it here. Up and until her second day at Devereux, Andrea had been using 2 antidepressants called Effexor and Wellbutrin, both of which were commonly used to treat major depressive disorder. Usually, patients have to be on antidepressant medication for up to a month before they start to show signs of improvement. But then Dr. Saeed replaced the Wellbutrin with another antidepressant medication called Remeron, which is supposed to take only 2 weeks to take effect, instead of the usual 4. The combination of Effexor and Remeron is known as California rocket fuel and shouldn't be prescribed to anyone with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia because it can result in hypomania and mania, reduce your social inhibitions, and make you more likely to indulge in risky behavior. The maximum prescribed dose of Effexor for severely depressed patients, 375 milligrams a day. The maximum prescribed dose of Remeron, 45 milligrams. On the 18th of June, 2001, just 2 days before she suffered a psychotic break and drowned her children, Andrea was taking 450 milligrams of Effexor and 45 milligrams of Remeron. So over the maximum dose of Effexor and the maximum dose of Remeron, 2 drugs that have contraindications. That's the word, right? When the 2 drugs fuss around with each other. Then Dr. Saeed had her dosage adjusted to 300 milligrams of Effexor and 60 milligrams of Remeron, so dropping it below for one and then over for the other. A change which should have been implemented over the span of weeks, not one day, because there's no way to determine what effect this would have on the patient. Yeah, they're always super careful with medicines. They don't just take you off one and put you on the other. And they start you small and then you go up they make adjustments. This just seems just very rash. Worse still, one of the lesser-known side effects of Effexor at the time was an increase in hallucinations, and Andrea was no longer taking her antipsychotic medication to counter it. Not only was she not on antipsychotic medication, she'd been taken off it cold turkey, which had the effect of turning the intensity of her psychotic episodes from a 10 to a 100. Combined with the drastic change in her antidepressive medication, quote, it was like putting a gun in the hands of a severely mentally ill patient. Yeah, it does seem like this was poorly managed, allegedly, in my opinion. Now, it could be argued that Dr. Saeed could have had no idea what impact the standard treatment for major depression would have had on Andrea. After all, the increase in hallucinations wasn't a known side effect of Effexor at the time and would only be added to a list of side effects in 2002. But he did have Andrea's file. He did have at least 2 years' worth of psychiatric reports and opinions that said she was psychotic. He had Dr. Starbranch's notes, which specifically stated that she suspected that Andrea might be schizophrenic, and yet he still told Rusty to take Andrea off her antipsychotic medication cold turkey and completely ignored standard practice, which advised that any medication given to a severely mentally ill patient had to be adjusted gradually so that any adverse effects could be avoided. Thank you. Yes, to this day, Rusty blames this abrupt change in Andrea's medication for the deaths of his children, explaining that if Dr. Saeed had just done his job, quote, my kids would be alive, Andrea would be in recovery, and we wouldn't be famous. I don't think he's wrong, allegedly, in my opinion. Old Mother Worldly. For the duration of the trial, several people were called to provide a deeper look at Andrea's life before she murdered her children. The various doctors who treated her all explained that they'd done their best to treat her according to the information that they had available at the time. And Dr. Starbranch explained that from what she'd seen, Rusty was a supportive husband and Andrea was a loving and caring mother. But Arlene Wilcott, the social worker who met with Andrea every week, told the court that Andrea was well aware that she had too much on her plate, but she insisted that she had to be the best mother. She also got the impression that although Andrea claimed that Rusty was the perfect husband, he wasn't as supportive as he could have been, and still left Andrea to do the majority of the work when it came to caring for their children. Just, I don't know, like, she's not working, and her husband is working. So, I mean, my wife doesn't work, and I work. Do I take care of the children less? Of course I do, because I work. It's not unreasonable. If she also had a job and they were equal earners and equal carers of the children, then sure. But that's not the arrangement they have. Jesus Christ. Debbie Holmes, Angela's best friend, also told the court that Andrea had already started to show signs that she was falling back into depression again the February before her father had died. Debbie had told the court that she had repeatedly told Rusty to get Andrea some help long before her father had died, and that after she was discharged from Devereux, the obvious lack of care that Andrea had been receiving, not just from Dr. Saeed, but Rusty and Andrea Yates as well, had upset her so much that her sister had advised her to make a note of it, just in case something happens. When Rusty was called to the stand, this feels a bit unreasonable on Rusty and Dora. I mean, I understand why they're upset at Dr. Saeed. He's got a duty of care and, he's a professional. But Rusty and Dora, Rusty seemed to be a good husband. Dora Yates seems to be a supportive mother. I mean, I don't know, guys. This seems, I guess, 28, 29 pages isn't going to give me the whole story here, but, it does seem a bit unreasonable. When Rusty was called to the stand, defense attorney George Parnham asked him to expand on a few things that were already common knowledge at the time. That he'd worked at NASA, that he'd met Andrea when they were both 25, and the first time he realized that something was wrong was shortly after Luke's birth. He then told the court about Andrea's 2 attempts to end her life and her 3 hospital visits. He explained how rapidly she'd started to improve after Starbranch had started injecting her with Haldol, how she'd kept on improving to the point that she was baking Christmas cookies with the children, and claimed that Andrea had only started to decline again after her father had passed away. Defense attorney Parnham then briefly touched on the decisions that Rusty and Andrea had made together as a couple, their decision to have as many children as God would allow, the roles the 2 of them would take on during their marriage, the decision to move into the trailer, the decision to sell the house and buy the bus, the decision to homeschool their kids. I mean, these are, again, are they decisions that I would make? Absolutely no. Are they reasonable decisions that I think is kind of okay? Yes, it's fine. There's nothing weird here. Rusty explained that they had made these decisions as a couple. He told the court that they had intended to have a more traditional marriage from the start and to split their household responsibilities just like their forefathers had done centuries before them, with the husband as the breadwinner and the wife as the caregiver. It's not how me and my wife decided it. It's just like I started making lots of money and it just didn't make sense for her to work while we have young kids. Very lucky position to be in. And I won't speak for my wife, but I like it. I think, she likes it as well. I think she'd say the same. Although I think she would like to go back to work at some point because, I don't know, she's like that. No, support that. Mr. Parnham then asked Rusty about the Warrenetskis and how he'd met them and how they kept in touch. Rusty explained that the Warrenetskis would send out newsletters to keep their followers updated on their lives and beliefs, and that he and Andrea would read those newsletters whenever they arrived. Andrea kept most of them and actively corresponded with Rachel Warrenetsky, who she saw as a friend. Defense attorney Barnum then pointed out that despite Rusty's belief that they were just a traditional family, a lot of the things Andrea believed seemed to have been based on the teachings of the Warrenetskis, and that they might have influenced a lot of the decisions that Andrea had made after she and Rusty were married. Again, do I like these Warrenetskis? No. Do I think that they're making sensible decisions? No. Do I think that they're all adults and they fucking can? Yes! That decision included her decision to opt for natural childbirth. Again, it's her fucking choice. Is it something I'd be like, no, dose me the fuck up. But is she allowed to make that decision? Yes! And opting out of receiving an epidural because the Warrenetskis believed that childbirth was a humbling experience for women. It included a decision to stop working after Noah was born because a good wife should devote all her time to her husband and children. It included a decision to use cloth diapers instead of disposable ones because the Warrenetskis believed that it would help her to disassociate herself from the material world. I mean, all of this is fascinating, but how the fuck is it relevant? It included her decision to homeschool the children on her own. It included her decision not to ask for help when she needed it, because Rachel Warrenitsky told her that she was paying for Eve's sins, and that it would be her fault if the children ended up in hell one day. They might even have influenced her decision to end her children's lives while they were still young, because according to a newsletter that Michael and Rachel Warrenitsky had sent out to their followers, quote, "I cannot stress how serious this whole thing is. By the time a child is 14 or 15, it's too late. By this time, the thinking of the sinful world that you have taught them takes over. You feed them with the world's ways, and you reap exactly what you sowed." All right, Warrenitsky's, I fucking hate you. I hate you, pieces of shit, allegedly, in my opinion. To expand on his theory regarding the amount of influence that the Warrenitskys had on Andrea, he called Dr. Lucy Purrier to the stand. Dr. Purrier told the court that she is a psychiatrist who specializes in treating women with Is this the defense saying this? It feels very defensy, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, it feels a bit irrelevant, but I guess it's just building up a picture of, I don't feel we need to, do we really need to, we should be focusing on the mental health argument though. Why are we bringing in the Warrenitskys? That's not an excuse to murder. What is an excuse is the fact that she's clearly batshit insane. Or was. And that she runs a clinic that aims, Dr. Purrier that helps women prevent postpartum depression. Dr. Purrier told the court that she has 4 children of her own, and that she initially had been reluctant to agree to help Andrea. But in the end, one of her goals was to help educate the public about just how dangerous postpartum depression could be to both the mother and the baby, so she had agreed to accept Andrea Yates as a patient. Dr. Purrier started the meeting with Andrea a month after the drownings took place, and then told the court that it was soon clear to her that Andrea had acted due to systematic delusions regarding her children and herself. Quote, "On the day of the drowning, Andrea Yates believed that her children were going to hell, that Satan was trying to get her children, that Satan was present in her, and at one point that Satan may even be pressuring her to kill her children or drown her children, but that the only opposition she had at that time to save her children from Satan was to send them to heaven. She told me, because they were so innocent at that particular time, that God might take them up." End quote. Dr. Purrier explained that one of the mistakes some people made, even some of the psychiatrists who evaluated Andrea after her arrest, was to try and rationalize Andrea's actions. Dr. Purrier explained that psychosis is not rational because you're not in the altered reality that the patient is experiencing. You have to understand the rules of their altered reality before you can even attempt to rationalize the decisions they made while in the middle of a psychotic episode. Yeah, and when we do that, we understand what she did. Dr. Purrier told the court that in the time she got to know Andrea and her history, she learned that there were a lot of things that when put together broke the metaphorical camel's back and led to Andrea drowning her children. There were her genetic factors, a predisposition for developing mental illness. There were the multiple pregnancies, the fact that she'd breastfed all of her children, which took a toll on her body and her mental health. The fact that she had so many children so close together, that she was homeschooling them, that she was doing it all on her own without any outside help. The living conditions in the bus, her father's death, and most importantly, her religious beliefs, which Dr. Purrier described as being morally rigid. Dr. Purrier explained that Andrea had told her that she'd seen the Warrenitskys as spiritual leaders, that she believed in a lot of the same things they did. Mr. Purnham then presented one of the Warrenitskys' newsletters to the court. It was titled These Perilous Times and contained a poem called Old Mother Worldly that the Warrenitskys had written. Old Mother Worldly was very, very lazy. All her children were driving her crazy. The Bible told her to spank and train them, but time raced by, and now she could not constrain them. The fruit of her selfishness she did now see. On the date of judgment she had no plea. Poor Mother Worldly was cast into hell. What becomes of the children from such a Jezebel? It feels like a 14-year-old wrote it in English class. Oh, you rhymed lazy with crazy. Well done. How original and thoughtful. This poem contained some of the Warrenitskys' core beliefs, that the modern world had strayed too far from the path of righteousness, and that they had doomed their children to hell by wanting their husbands to treat them like equals instead of servants. Well, they're not paid. Sounds like slaves. Whose only purpose in life was to bear their husband's children and always be subservient to him. Dr. Purrier then told the court that a lot of Andrea's religious delusions seemed to be built around the preachings of the Warrenitskys. Quote, "This kind of information is what her delusion was built around, particularly the lines, 'The fruit of her selfishness she did now see.' Mrs. Yates would tell me over and over again that she was a bad mother, that she was self-centered and too selfish, and on the day of judgment she would be reckoned with. At the bottom line, what becomes of the children from such a Jezebel? Her delusion was about this. She was a bad mother, and her children would go to hell, and it was her fault." The quote ends. Now, according to Dr. Purrier, These were the rules of Andrea's altered version of reality. While in the middle of a psychotic episode, these were the rules she lived by. Be a good mother, or your children would end up in hell. But the Warrenetskis had already reinforced her belief that she was a bad mother. She wasn't good enough. Rachel Warrenetsky had told her that she was full of sin. Michael Warrenetsky had told both Rusty and Andrea that they were straying from the path of righteousness, that their children were badly behaved, and that they would end up in hell one day. Andrea herself would tell her social worker that she didn't think that she was good enough. She wasn't the best wife or the best mother. She was lacking. And when Andrea became psychotic following her father's death, these beliefs became her truth, and it became a part of her reality. And when Dr. Saeed took her off her antipsychotic meds, when he changed her dosages of Effexor and Remeron, when he turned her hallucinations up from a 10 to a 100, all Andrea Yates knew was that she was a bad mother and that her children were going to hell. Quoting again. When I asked her what she was thinking at the time, she said she wasn't thinking anything. She wasn't thinking whether it was right or wrong, whether it was illegal. She was only determined to save her children. According to Dr. Perrier, Andrea couldn't be held liable for her actions that day as per Texas's penal law because, quote, her thought process at that time was not like someone who's not psychotic. It's not that she could come up with a list of options and choose off the list as to what her choice is going to be. Is this right? Is this wrong? She was psychotic at the time and driven by her delusion that her children were going to hell and that she must save them. The argument against. All right, here we go. Let's see how this goes. So far, I haven't really touched on all the prosecution's arguments against the defense's witness testimonies because it was all very repetitive, petty, and in some cases, it didn't really make much sense. But 3 weeks after Andrea Yates' murder trial kicked off, it was finally the prosecution's turn to call their own expert witness to the stand, and they were going to do their best to prove that the murder of the Yates children had been premeditated. All right, good fucking luck. Their star witness was Dr. Park Dietz, a forensic psychiatrist who testified in hundreds of criminal cases, including the murder trials of Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber. In the months leading up to the trial, Dr. Dietz had met with Andrea for 2 days in November 2001 and had read her medical history, spoke to her family, friends, and doctors, read the police reports, and had written a very detailed report on her case, which was brought up multiple times during the trial. Dr. Dietz explained that he had suspected that Andrea had schizophrenia almost as soon as he met her, but he then went on to explain that to simply say Andrea was schizophrenic was a lazy diagnosis, since in his opinion, Andrea Yates suffered from schizoaffective disorder, which is a mixture of schizophrenia and mood disorders. In Andrea's case, she's both schizophrenic and bipolar, and Dr. Dietz confirmed that yes, that satisfies the first requirement of the not guilty by reason of insanity plea. That left the question of whether or not Andrea knew that murdering her children was wrong. Dr. Dietz told the court that when he evaluates a person and the crimes they'd committed, he basically does whatever we do when we cover a criminal case. He goes back to the beginning to find out why the person did what they did. Quoting him, all human behavior, and that includes criminal behavior, arises from the interaction between a person and a context, the environment. Both the person and the environment matter. So to understand the crime, we need to look at both the person and the context in which the criminal conduct occurs. Dr. Dietz then summarized Andrea's history, much as I've already done, adding that Andrea had already been struggling back in June 1999 and that the 2 attempts on her life had been a cry for help. He then pointed out that after her second attempt on her life, Andrea had told Dr. Thompson about the hallucinations and that, in hindsight, she was warning her doctors that she was a danger to her children. Then Andrea received the treatment she needed, and she got better. But Andrea refuses to believe that she's psychotic since she doesn't want to be labeled as being crazy, and she tells her doctors that she wants to go off her medication because she doesn't need it. The doctors at Springs Shadows Glen had warned Andrea against doing it. Her therapist had warned her against doing it. Dr. Starbranch had warned her against doing it. Her best friend Debbie Holmes had warned her against doing it. But Rusty and Andrea wanted more children, so it was enough of a motivator to stop taking her medication. I'm not really sure what this has to do with whether she knew what she was doing was wrong at the time. It doesn't matter if she made the decision to come off her medication. The fact is she came off her medication. Right? Am I, again, I bring it up, am I crazy in thinking that this is pretty fucking cut and dry insanity? Like, we needed a trial for this? And things went downhill from there. Dr. Dietz then discussed what he referred to as the pre-homicide period. Andrea Yates is off her medication, has another baby, continues to homeschool her children, and her father falls ill. All the stresses she's experiencing result in her experiencing another series of psychotic episodes. She tells both Debbie and Rusty that she's convinced that Satan lives within her. But since the Ronetskys were always harping on about Satan and how he was influencing them, they didn't find these conversations to be odd. What Andrea didn't tell them about was that she was once again thinking about harming her children. Quote, "Ordinarily, when someone keeps a criminal plan secret, they do it because they know it's wrong. That's why you keep it secret, hiding it from other people." The explanation Andrea offered was that if she talked about it, it would happen. If that's true, she believed that killing the children would save them. Then why would she not want it to happen? She would want to talk about it, so it came true and her children could be saved. You're trying to rationalize the irrational. So I concluded at that point that she's keeping it a secret. She knows that other people are going to stop her, that it's wrong, that it's a bad idea, and she admits as such. She admits that she knows people will stop her. Dr. Dietz explained that Andrea had these thoughts for over 2 months and didn't act on them. Then Rusty and Andrea Yates started to leave her alone for an hour in the mornings and an hour in the evenings, despite Dr. Said warning them that Andrea should be supervised 24/7. When Rusty leaves for work at 9 a.m. on the morning of the 20th of June, Andrea knows that Dora won't be there for at least another hour. That for that hour, no one would be able to keep her from drowning the children. When prosecutor Ombi pointed out the defense had argued that Andrea had murdered her children in an attempt to save their souls, Dr. Dietz explained that Andrea would tell the police that she knew that she was committing the 7th deadly sin. But murder isn't one of the deadly sins. Andrea believed it was, and that's the important thing. She thought that killing the children was sinful. That's another piece of evidence that she knew it was wrong. If you know it's a sin, then you know it's wrong. Just as if you know Satan wants such things to happen or believe that, you know it's wrong. Dr. Dietz then explained that during the post-homicide phase, Andrea had told the police that she had murdered the children and deserved to be punished for it. The day following the murders, she had told Dr. Ferguson that she had murdered the children to save them and claimed that it had been part of a prophecy. Andrea's psychosis became even worse in the days following the murders of her children, and at one point, she was convinced that the walls of her cell had pictures of unicorns and teddy bears on them, which she referred to as satanic symbols. My daughter would be so disappointed. Satanic unicorns. And that she could hear demons and hellhounds growling at her through the walls of her cell. During every interview, her reasons for why she had murdered her children kept on changing as she tried to explain her own actions to herself. According to several of the psychologists who testified during the trial, this is known as memory alteration or changed memory, and it meant that within just weeks of murdering her children, Andrea Yates could no longer remember how it had happened, what the prophecy was, or the reasons behind why her children had to die. But this also meant that even though Andrea Yates knows what she did that day, she can't tell you why. And by the time Dr. Dietz interviewed her in November 2001, she had been on Haldol for 5 months, and the reasoning behind her actions that day had become more rational because she was no longer experiencing any psychotic episodes, which made it difficult to determine exactly what Andrea Yates had been thinking when she murdered her children. When prosecutor Ombi then asked Dr. Dietz what his thoughts on Andrea's perception of right or wrong on the 20th of June 2001 were, Dr. Dietz explained that, quote, "At the time of drowning each of the children, Mrs. Yates knew that her actions were wrong in the eyes of the law. In other words, she knew it was illegal. Mrs. Yates knew that her actions were wrong in the eyes of society. Mrs. Yates knew that her actions were wrong in the eyes of God." But Dr. Dietz would go on to clarify with regards to Section 8.1 of Texas penal law, her motive for doing what she knew was wrong may have been to send the children to heaven, but in order for it to apply here, she would have to not know her conduct was wrong, and I don't think that's true. Secondly, for it to apply here, that belief that she is sending the children to heaven has to be the result of severe mental disease. And even though she had a severe mental disease, I don't think that's what made her believe in heaven, and I don't think it's appropriate to say that someone is psychotic if they believe in heaven or hell. No, but someone is psychotic if they believe that their children are going to become demonic by the time they're 14 and need to go to heaven now. This is incredibly weak. I would be enormously shocked if the jury comes back with anything other than not guilty by insanity. Enormously shocked. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine Dr. Dietz, Mr. Parnham asked him a bunch of questions that really came down to nothing. Things like, how much do you charge to testify on behalf of the state? When's the last time you treated a patient? Have you ever treated a woman with postpartum depression? Your company mostly focuses on consulting, don't you? While compiling this report, did you speak to Andrea's family or the doctors who treated her? No? Well, so how could you have made a reasonable judgment of her mental state at the time if you didn't speak to the people who knew her best? Okay, so he's not attacking his argument, he's attacking the witness. Mr. Parnham also touched on Dr. Dietz's other work, consulting. Dr. Dietz told the court that the last time he had treated a patient was in 1989 and that he'd never treated a woman with postpartum depression. Unlike Dr. Poirier, he wasn't a specialist in the field, but he had consulted on an episode of Law & Order during which a woman with postpartum depression drowns her children. Bro, you cannot be serious. He really said that? She's declared to be insane at the end of the episode, is found not guilty by reason of insanity. And now he's saying the opposite, despite what he consulted on the TV show for. I mean, money talks, doesn't it? Allegedly. Dr. Dietz then told the court that this episode aired shortly before Andrea had murdered her children. The discussion around the episode of Law & Order had lasted maybe a minute, but it would have a significant impact on the trial. You see, the state had leapt onto this brief mention of the Law & Order episode, since Rusty had previously told the media that he and Andrea both loved watching Law & Order. All right. Okay. Prosecutor Owenby called Dr. Ferguson back to the stand and reminded the court that Dr. Ferguson had implied that Andrea was very suggestive during their first meeting, that she was easy to manipulate while she was in the middle of a psychotic episode. Is it possible that during a psychosis, Andrea watches this episode of Law & Order and realizes that it's an easy out? What is her motivation for killing her children other than being insane? What reason? There's no motive. They're her fucking children. That it helps formulate a plan to get rid of her children. Dr. Ferguson explained that she didn't know, but Prosecutor Umby allowed the suggestion that Andrea had been influenced by this episode of Law & Order to settle with the jury. During his closing argument, Prosecutor Joseph Umby further suggested that Andrea had been looking for a way out of her life with Rusty and the kids. I know they're going to suggest that, but it's fucking nasty. And when she watched the episode about a mother with postpartum depression, inspiration struck. It was enough to suggest to the jury that Andrea hadn't drowned her children because she'd been taken off her antipsychotic medication or had suffered a mental break. Instead, she'd been planning on drowning her children for weeks. And on the 12th of March 2002, the jury came back with a verdict, which I've just read. We, the jury, find the defendant Andrea Yates guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment. I am fucking speechless. I am speechless. I don't know what to say. This seems absolutely mad. Judgment Day. More than a year later, on the 10th of August 2003, Judge Belinda Hill sentenced Andrea Yates to life imprisonment and declared that she'd only be eligible for parole in 40 years. She was then sent to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas to serve her sentence and would be locked up in the hospital wing of the prison, along with the other criminally insane inmates. But in the year since the jury had declared that Andrea Yates was guilty of capital murder, a lot had happened behind the scenes. A writer named Susanna Malley had contacted defense attorney Parnham and told him that Dr. Dietz had lied during his testimony. You see, Susanna Malley had a very impressive CV. She covered Andrea Yates' trial for the New York Times Magazine, the Oprah Magazine, and Dateline NBC. Holy shit. She would also go on to write the book Are You There Alone? The Unspeakable Crime of Andrea Yates, based on the case. She teaches writing dramatic TV at Yale, and she's part of the writing team for the television show Law & Order Special Victims Unit. That's a pretty fucking impressive CV. It's like she's successful, also just teaches at Yale. Let's just throw that in. According to Susan O'Malley, Dr. Dietz had lied when he told the court that he'd consulted on an episode of Law & Order about a postpartum mother who drowned her kids, because that episode did not exist. No. No. Andrea's defense team then lodged an appeal, and it was granted on the basis that Dr. Dietz's fake testimony might have influenced the jury to think that Andrea Yates had been inspired by this non-existent television episode. Her sentence was reversed, and the Supreme Court ordered a retrial. It's fucking irresponsible. I hope you get some sort of proper fucking punishment for that, doctor. You need some. Is that perjury? Can we bring you into court for that? Can you serve some time for that? I think you should serve some time for that. By the time Andrea's second murder trial took place in January 2006, public opinion regarding Andrea had shifted. According to prosecutor Joseph Owimby, if there was a measurable opinion, it had swung to neutral. Neutral in the sense that she should be convicted, she should be jailed, but the tie her up behind a car and drag her through the streets crowd had gone away. During the second trial, the prosecution tried to prove that Andrea Yates had felt neglected by Rusty and murdered their children as an act of revenge. The defense once again explained that Andrea had been severely mentally ill, and that as far as she was concerned, she had been doing her best to keep her children from going to hell despite knowing that her actions were wrong. The trial lasted another month, and then the jury left to deliberate. After 3 days, They asked for photos of the 5 Yates children, and according to defense attorney Purnham, about 30 minutes later, they'd reached a verdict. Some of the jurors were crying, and we learned later that the reason they asked for the pictures is they took 2 minutes in silence for each child, in memory of that child's legacy. On the 26th of July 2006, the jury declared that we, the jury, find the defendant, Andrea Yates, not guilty by reason of insanity. The correct fucking verdict 5 years later. Andrea was placed in the custody of the Department of State Health Services and was committed to the Kerrville State Hospital. The facility is described as looking more like a college campus than a detention center, and Andrea has spent the last 19 years living there. Getting care at... Good. Yes. Every year, Andrea has the option to be evaluated for possible release, but Andrea will turn 61 years old this year and has no interest in leaving the Kerrville State Hospital. She feels safe there and feels like there's nothing left for her in the outside world. She spends her days walking around the gardens, sewing aprons and making birthday cards. She does volunteer work, advocates for women with postpartum depression, and receives monthly visits from her attorney, George Parnham, as well as her now ex-husband, Rusty, who divorced her in 2005 and has since had another child of his own. That's so fucking hard, man. But Andrea's never stopped grieving for her children. Her room is decorated with photos of them, as well as the pictures she draws and the crafts she makes for them. She still celebrates their birthdays and regularly watches the home videos she took of them. In a lot of ways, she's stuck living in the past, and I think it's fair to say that her life also ended the day she drowned her children. According to George Parnham, there were 6 victims in this case, and one of them was Andrea herself. And so I'd like to end this episode in memory of the 5 Yates children: Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and little Mary. Rest in peace.